Chapter 199. Gong Yimo took a step back and bowed. It's late. I should be on my way. There's no need for your highness to send me off. Gong Che looked at her deeply, unable to speak for a long time. He was almost certain that the person in front of him was Gong Yimo. Why did she refuse to admit it? Why did she want to leave? This unrequited desire stimulated the impulse that he had painstakingly suppressed to the point of erupting. He really wanted to pull the person in front of him into his arms and never let her leave again. But before he could say anything, the sound of hooves could be heard from afar. A group of carriages hurried over. Gong Che immediately recognized the person from the heavy black carriages and the iconic 6 red horses. Gong Dai. It was Gong Dai. Gong Yimo naturally saw Gong Dai's carriage as well. She immediately panicked. She didn't know why, but she wasn't afraid of anyone. But when she thought of how Gong Dai had cut his wrist and bled, she was afraid. But she still pretended to be calm and smiled at Gong Che. It seems that your highness has a friend. There's no need for me to send you off. Farewell. Although Gong Che really wanted to find out her true identity, Gong Dai's arrival had caught him off guard. He definitely didn't want Gong Dai to see Gong Yimo, so he gestured to someone behind him. Immediately, someone appeared in front of Gong Yimo and knelt on one knee. Hearing the sound of hooves approaching, Gong Che didn't have time to say anything. No matter how reluctant he was, he could only endure it. Don't worry, I'll let the shadow guards take him around the city first. Nothing will happen, just bear with it a little longer. But the words that came out were spoken through gritted teeth. Ing Feng, send Sir out through the side door. Ing Feng looked up at Gong Che. Yes. Gong Yimo raised her head and smiled at Gong Che. Goodbye. With that, she followed Eagle Peak down the city walls. At the same time, Gong Dai's carriage arrived at the city gates. Because Gong Che had sent everyone away, no one came to open the door for Gong Dai. After a year, the two of them met for the first time. Who would have thought that they would be in such a stalemate? Lo Chi whispered something at the window of the carriage. A moment later, the curtain was lifted, and the slender figure of Gong Dai strode out. He raised his head and saw that Gong Che was the only one left on the wall. Royal brother, why did you close the city gates and stop me from entering? When Gong Che heard this, he waved his hand again. After sending someone to call for the soldiers guarding the city, he looked down at Gong Dai's hateful face and felt extremely indignant. Why did he come? He was so close to finding out if that person was a mower or not. Therefore, he really couldn't bring himself to smile, and said in an extremely bad tone, Brother, please wait for a moment. Seeing him like this, Gong Dai narrowed his eyes. Lo Chi had said that he saw someone talking to the crown prince on the city walls from afar, but that person left as soon as he arrived. It was a very normal thing, but he found it strange. Who was that person? Could it be someone sent by Yuheng? Could it be Royal Sister? Thinking of this, he became excited and looked up at Gong Che. Dare I ask, Royal brother, who was the other person on the city walls? Why did he leave in such a hurry? Gong Che's heart skipped a beat. Just a friend. You don't know him. Could he be Yuheng's friend? Gong Dai sneered. Impudent. Gong Che was suddenly enraged. Are you saying that I colluded with outsiders? Gong Dai's eyes curved into crescents. Isn't that so? Gong Che was annoyed. After a while, he said, It's late now. I'll hold a welcoming dinner for royal brother tomorrow. Goodbye. As he spoke, he hurriedly left. Unexpectedly, Gong Ju leapt up from the carriage and landed in front of Gong Che at the city gate with a few clicks of his feet. His black robes and black hair were a stark contrast to Gong Che's moon-colored robes. At this moment, his eyes were smiling, and there was a kind of evilness to them. Royal brother, where are you going in such a hurry? Gong Che's heart was vaguely anxious. Just now, he had asked the shadow guard to send the person out of the side door, but there was no side door in Wan City. Therefore, the shadow guard must have understood his meaning and detained the person in the city. So he had to find him, find out who he was. But Gong Dai was here, and he really didn't want to reveal any flaws. He was afraid that Imo would be found by Gong Dai first. It's late. I want to return to the residence. Is that so? Gong Dai didn't back down. He could sense Gong Che's panic. He was definitely hiding something, and this matter was related to him, so it could only be because of his royal sister. Where's the person you saw just now? Is she also in your residence? Gong Dai. Gong Che was a little angry. I'm the crown prince. You have no right to question me. Oh? At this moment, many of Gong Dai's men had climbed up the city gates and stood beside Gong Dai. Gong Che's hidden guards also appeared. Both sides were eyeing each other covetously, and the atmosphere was very tense. In terms of numbers, Gong Dai had a little more. At this moment, he was no longer smiling, but his face darkened. His usually cold eyes were even colder now. Royal brother, you know why I'm here. Tell me, where is she? And Gong Che wasn't afraid of him. So what if he had more people? Would he dare to kill him? I don't know. His coldness caused Gong Ju's body to erupt with murderous intent. It was just like how Gong Che found Gong Dai an eyesore, but in Gong Dai's eyes, there was no one more annoying than Gong Che. The royal sister was his to begin with. Gong Che just had to stick his nose into it. How despicable. Just as the stalemate was about to break out, a signal firework suddenly exploded in the air. It was fiery red and seemed to be in extreme danger. Gong Che cursed inwardly. Oh no! He actually ran past Gong Dai and headed in the direction of the firework. Setting off the firework was a way for Gong Che's men to send signals, and the firework just now was exclusive to Eagle Peak. There was only one reason why he would set off the firework, and that was because the person had disappeared. Immerse must have sensed something and escaped after shaking off the shadow guards. He was too careless. Immerse was such a smart person. How could she not know the details of Wan City before coming here? She must have known that there was no side door in Wan City. So now, he really didn't have the mood to deal with Gong Dai and chased after her. Gong Dai stood on the city wall and looked in the direction of the firework. After a long time, he revealed a smile. This smile was beautiful and different from his usual cold smile. This time, the smile extended from his heart to his eyes. Royal sister. She's really in Wan City. That's great. As long as she's here, I'll definitely be able to find her. Gong Yimo sighed inwardly at her bad luck. Gong Che was already hard enough to deal with, so why is Gong Dai here too? Shouldn't he still be in the palace getting rid of dissidents? With this thought, she wiped off the disguise on her face as she ran. She took off her outer clothes and threw them into her space to change her appearance. But now, she was surrounded by Gong Che and Gong Dai. Could she escape? Chapter 200. At this moment, there was not a single person on the streets. If she walked out, she would be too eye-catching. Moreover, the entire Wan City was probably surrounded by Gong Che. If she wanted to leave, it would be difficult. Thinking of this, she was not in a hurry. Anyway, she had Gong Che's handwritten letter and the additional regulations stamped with his personal seal. Once she left the city, she could immediately contact her shipyard to start building a fleet. At that time, she could just send a manager who was proficient in the water to deal with the smuggling business. She would go and do something else. She did not want to be involved in these matters. Love was hard to deal with, but it was hard to fight against the passing of time. After all, men were fickle. They might be able to persist for 1 or 2 years, but not 3 or 4 years. This thought made her eyes dim for a moment before they lit up again. The layout of the entire Wan City appeared in her mind, and she suddenly thought of a wonderful place to go. Gong Che had indeed mobilized all his subordinates to seal off the entire Wan City. As for Gong Dai, he did not bring many people with him this time. Looking at the huge Wan City, he frowned slightly. He felt that Royal Sister was always giving him problems. Once the sun rose, there would be more people. They would not be able to catch Royal Sister. Even if Wan City was sealed, she would still have a way to blend in with the crowd. So only at night, when there was no one around, she did not dare to act rashly. That was when it was easy to find. Before coming, Lo Chi had already reported the situation of Wan City to him. At this moment, Lo Chi pointed to a place and said, "Your Highness, previously you asked where the most crooked and honest people were in Wan City. It should be over there. That place is the city god temple. But it is summer now, and many poor people and beggars live there. It is very chaotic." When Gong Dai heard this, He smiled faintly and immediately walked towards that place. Royal Sister said that the most likely place would become a safe place because it could easily mislead smart people. The city god temple was the best place to hide. So Gong Che thought that Royal Sister would not go to such an obvious place. But he thought that she would definitely be there. When Gong Yimo finished her disguise and accidentally barged into this dilapidated temple, her expression became complicated for a moment. Her aura fluctuated slightly, and even her black hair fluttered without any wind. This was the first time in her life that her emotions were so intense, because in her previous life, she had finally died here. At that time, she had been rescued from the death row prison and was preparing to leave Dayu State for Yuheng that very night. However, Gong Dai had sealed off all the exits, leaving her with nowhere to run. Therefore, she gave up, stopped here, and told everyone to leave. But how could those brothers who had gone through fire and water leave her to die alone? It was only when she threatened them with death and told them the truth about her body that they left with hatred in their hearts. Looking at the merciful Bodhisattva in front of her, Gong Yimo forgot to hide. There were so many people sleeping around her, but she acted as if she could not hear them. She stood there in a daze, as if she was the only one left in the world. She slowly turned around, and the surrounding environment actually began to change. It was as if she had returned to the winter of her previous life when she was running for her life. Once again, she saw with her own eyes the scene of those people kneeling in front of her and crying bitterly. She also seemed to see herself, covered in injuries, lying in a corner of this rundown temple, giving her final orders to the people in front of her who were unwilling to leave. My body is like a lamp that has run out of oil. I can't live for much longer. Don't cry. Before I die, I want you to promise me 3 things. Empress, don't be discouraged. We will definitely cure you. When the time comes, we will come back and kill that adulterous pair. His words made her laugh, and then she shook her head. That person's voice gradually lowered, and then turned into sobs. Men do not cry easily, but the woman in front of them was not only their master, but also their brother. Not only were they unable to treat her injuries, but they also wanted to betray her and leave. Adulterous pair? Gong Yimo coughed softly, and her eyes were smiling, as if showing some kind of psychedelic color, and said faintly, "Whether it is or not, I hope that you won't take revenge for me." Why? Someone's eyes were red. They treated you like this. Why can't we take revenge? That Gong Che is ungrateful, and Su Miaolan's heart is like a scorpion. And that Gong Dai, he is even more guilty. You worked hard to pacify the country, but what about them? They were still working together a second ago, and the next second, they put you to death. Such people can only atone for their sins with death. Gong Yimo smiled bitterly. They were her most loyal subordinates, as well as her most valiant warriors. They should be warriors whose names would be passed down through the ages, not rebels. Moreover, she had finally pacified the world. How could she be willing to start another dispute, or for a few scum? So she smiled. Not all of them. In this world, everyone had 2 sides. One side was good to some people, and the other side was bad to others. Just like Kim Yoon and her master, they were very good to her. She suddenly missed her master a little. You still don't understand. Thinking of her master's tragic death, she closed her eyes. This is how the love between a man and a woman is. There is a beginning. There are ups and downs, and naturally, there is also an end. So, there is no right or wrong in this. At this point, she smiled again. But I am not a saint. In my heart, I also hate. I hate June for being fickle, hate Su Miaolan for being cruel. I hate that I was framed just after I handed over my power. But in my heart, I don't hate. Her words were profound, and everyone looked at her with red eyes, not saying a word. Of course, the people in front of her were all tough and unyielding. Naturally, other than compassion, they could not understand her complex feelings. Gong Yimo smiled lightly and looked away. 10 years of war. June changing his love is normal. Su Miaolan wanted to be the empress, but because of me, she waited for more than 10 years. It is normal for her to hate me to the bone. Gong Dai is ruthless and ambitious. It is even more normal for him to act against me. I am not saying this because I have forgiven these people, but I want you all to know that all of this is just a winner takes all. So, there is no resentment, only unwillingness. Unwillingness to lose. She paused, and it was unknown what she thought of, but her eyes blossomed with radiance. She was obviously in an extremely difficult situation, but her smile illuminated the entire ruined temple. But I am unreconciled. It is because, if not for the continuous years of war and killing, all of my desires have been obliterated. If not for the fact that I am used to seeing life and death, and if not for the fact that I am mentally and physically exhausted, even if I had handed over my power, I would not have been schemed against like this. So, I am unreconciled because they had an unfair advantage. They won dishonorably. When she said these words, she seemed to be a little depressed, but more than that, she was relieved. Now, I am about to die, but I am not afraid. Perhaps in my heart, I have been waiting for this day. Your Majesty, of course, these are all words for later. A loss is a loss. If you are not willing to admit defeat and continue to send people to stir up trouble, that is not the conduct of a gentleman. So, you are not allowed to take revenge. Even if you want to take revenge, it should not be you. Chapter 201. All the soldiers present were silent. Their eyes were red as they gritted their teeth. They knew that perhaps this was Gong Yimo's idea, because when she pacified the world, she did not have the ambition to continue to be the ruler. She only had a heart full of desolation and despair. Every time after a battle, she would stand on the battlefield and watch them dig pits to cremate the bodies. She also requested that not only the bodies of her own soldiers be cremated, but also the soldiers of other countries. The billowing smoke and the smell of burning flesh made these men hide far away. However, every time, she would stand there quietly and watch, allowing the heat wave to burn her face. Every time she won a great victory, she would be exhausted and sleep for 3 days and 3 nights. Her martial arts were unparalleled. How could she be so tired? She was just mentally tired. They watched helplessly as she turned from a mischievous young girl into a helpless killing god who did not know how to deal with violence. In the end, the Empress, who was clearly still elegant but had an old mentality, was filled with grief. They also understood that she was only saying this to prevent them from taking revenge. Now, Gong Dai and Gong Che each had half of the country. Her era had passed. They were no match for the Emperor and the Regent. They would only be sending themselves to their deaths if they forced themselves. This feeling of helplessness and defeat made people go crazy. Someone stood up and cried out in pain. Are we just going to let them go like this? You may be a person with a knife, but don't they have any sins on them? Don't they need to suffer retribution? When Gong Yimo heard this, she suddenly looked at them and slowly smiled. Like comforting a child, just like that quick-witted young girl in the past, she blinked and obviously deceived them. So it's like this. How about this? If there is a next life, I will definitely make it difficult for them. I will not admit defeat so easily. After she said this, she suddenly looked at a certain spot in the ruined temple. At this moment, she was sitting, and in this time and space, Gong Yimo was standing and looking in that direction. Time and space seemed to have overlapped in an instant, but one was a biting cold wind, the other was a cool summer night, one was middle-aged, the other was still young. They were the same person, but their gazes seemed to have collided. After a long time, she, who was covered in wounds, smiled faintly at her other self, causing the young Gong Yimo to suddenly tremble. Hugging his head, he squatted down. Can't let them have a good time? No, this wasn't what she wanted to do. At this time, a kind-hearted little old man saw that she was in pain and quickly got up. From the moment Gong Yimo came in, he had noticed her. She looked like a little boy from a poor family. She suddenly barged in and looked at Bodhisattva as if she had lost her soul. Now that she looked like she was in pain, it did not seem like she was faking it. Young man, what happened to you? Are you sick? He was a little worried because there was a rule in the temple that sick people were not allowed to stay. So if Gong Yimo was sick, She would either have to endure it or be kicked out. Gong Yimo was being pulled by someone. She grabbed him tightly and shot him a glare. It was as if he had grabbed onto a life-saving straw. "I'm fine. I'm just too tired." Hearing her words, the little old man, who was originally frightened by her glare, heaved a sigh of relief and quickly gave the spot he had prepared for her. "Since that's the case, this spot is for you. You can rest here. I'll sleep under the tree for the night." Gong Yimo opened her mouth and wanted to say that it was not necessary. However, the other party was very insistent. Because of the tremors in her body, she was too tired and finally lay down. As she lay down, her line of sight met the bodhisattva in the middle of the temple. She was looking at her with a kind smile. In this life, almost 10 years had passed. No one would have thought that in this life. The moment she woke up in the cold palace, her first reaction was not happiness but pain. Why did she come back to life? Was she going to experience those terrifying nightmares again? Heaven was blind. She was an executioner who killed people like flies. How many innocent people had she caused to die tragically? Just like that kind-hearted old man just now, she had killed no less than 100 people. She was a vengeful spirit who was unwilling to accept her fate. No matter how open-minded she would still feel hatred and resentment. When she was violent, she would want to overthrow the dynasty again and bury everyone with her. But she was also a wanderer who was physically and mentally exhausted. In her previous life, she had experienced too much pain, doubts, frustrations, uneasiness, betrayal, and killings. Every time she saw villages being massacred, mountains and rivers blocked, as well as the schemes from the imperial court and the curses of the people, she felt physically and mentally exhausted. She thought that it was a mistake for heaven to let her transmigrate. She did not expect that she would be reborn again. However, her heart was full of holes and she did not want to live anymore. Later, she spent 3 whole days to figure out why she was reborn and what she wanted to do in this life. She wanted to atone for her sins. This thought suddenly gave her a new lease of life. She wanted to live on, so naturally, she did not want to take revenge. Humans were selfish. In her previous life, they had dealt with her for various reasons. In the end, she was tired and lost. She only had herself to blame. But in this life, she did not think that anyone could bring her any harm. So she did not need to kill those people to take revenge for something that had not happened yet. No, even if they wronged her, it did not matter. As long as they did not step on her bottom line, she would let them go. So when Gong Dai said that she was kind, she only smiled. If this was kindness, she felt that it was the indulgence of the strong towards the weak. She was proud. This pride came from her soul. She was a strong person, so she did not consider the consequences of her actions. Whether it was Gong Che, Gong Dai, Su Miaolon, Li Ku, or Si Wuyan, she could let them all go, because there were no consequences that she could not bear. If they wanted to kill, it was fine, but it should be based on a contest between people of the same level. But she was much stronger than them. She did not have the habit of bullying the weak, so she chose to forgive and not punish. Because she was a true superior. She was not afraid of anyone or any accidents. Of course, she also had a weakness. She was afraid of love and ties. Love made people dull. Ties made people cower. And in this period of time, she seemed to be a little lost. But tonight, in the instant that she saw this bodhisattva, her thoughts seemed to clear up. Once again, she returned to those 3 days when she was reborn. She could not bear to see Gong Che, because he was good to her in this life. She could not bear to see Gong Dai, because she had no one to depend on. She needed Gong Dai to be her thoughts. He was equivalent to her spiritual support. She treated them as family. But originally, she did not have any family. Perhaps it was cruel to think this way. But those who could truly be carefree were those who could let go of everything. Whether they existed or not, it was all the same. They were emotional people. They were also heartless people. It was as if something had been pushed open. In an instant, the aura on her body underwent a tremendous change. She actually charged from the 4th level of wind and nature to the 6th level. She had reached the peak level of her previous life. Chapter 202. The strong qi energy immediately woke up everyone in the ruined temple. However, Gong Yimo's practice of this technique paid particular attention to her state of mind and rhythm. Therefore, not only did this qi not make them feel uncomfortable, but it also felt like a spring breeze. Some of the sore parts of their bodies were healed, and they all exclaimed in wonder, "It must be the Bodhisattva." Amidst the noise, someone shouted, and everyone in the temple got up and kowtowed to the Bodhisattva. Their movements alerted those who did not manage to get a bed in the temple, and they all ran in. When they saw them kowtowing, they asked for the reason, and could not help but kowtow as well, thanking the Bodhisattva for her grace. Gong Yimo did not move in the crowd. She sat cross-legged on the haystack, and her body had a vast and natural aura. Sometimes it was as gentle as the wind, sometimes it was as heavy as the earth. Gradually, some black dirt seeped out of her body, making her look even dirtier, but no one noticed her or even looked at her. Because of this, she was like a strong wind, a tree full of vitality. From now on, as long as she wanted, she could make her aura disappear and become an existence that could be seen, but not captured. At this moment, orderly footsteps were heard from afar, and Gong Yimo opened her eyes. The moment she opened her eyes, it was as if there was a flash of light. If someone met her eyes at this moment, perhaps their soul would be captured by her, and they would become muddle-headed and stupid. Then, the aura in her eyes gradually converged, and finally, her eyeballs gradually turned turbid, and her aura changed, turning into a lonely and pitiful poor boy. Deep in her eyes, there was despair towards this world. Then he slowly got up and disappeared into the crowd, kowtowing to the Bodhisattva. The expression on his face was exactly the same as everyone else's, both grateful for the Bodhisattva's appearance and hoping that she could reward them more. It would be best if she could let them escape poverty and make a comeback in one night. When Gongdai saw this scene, the scene in front of him made him slightly confused. In the small temple, there were about 100 to 200 people, and they were kowtowing in the middle of the night, leaving him with no place to stand. When Lo Chi saw this, he quickly went in first and grabbed someone to ask, "What are you doing?" Lo Chi's cold expression was very frightening. When the man saw it, he quickly stuttered, "It's Bodhisattva. Bodhisattva has appeared." Luochi was baffled, so he let go of him and asked a few more people in succession. However, the answers they received were mostly the same. Some said that the Bodhisattva had sent down a ray of holy light to cure all their illnesses. Others said that the Bodhisattva had blown a gust of celestial wind to make them feel refreshed and energetic. Luochi suspiciously returned to report to Gongju. Gongju was very dissatisfied with the ambiguous answer, so he walked in. Sensing Gongdai walking in, Gong Yimo could feel that although his eyes were closed, she could feel that every step he took seemed steady. There was a slight sense of urgency and anxiety. After Gongdai came in, he finally caused some chaos. Not to mention the murderous guards holding torches behind him, just his temperament alone was like an unsheathed sword. At this moment, his edge was revealed. Wherever the tip of the sword pointed, there were cowering and fearful eyes. "It's not her. It's not her. These people are not her." Gong Dai's sharp gaze swept across, but he became more and more uneasy. No matter how a person disguised, the things in their bones could not be changed. Just like how Royal Sister could disguise herself as a strategist, a noble son, or even an entertainer, but there was no fear in her bones. She could not pretend to be, and the reason why he was so uneasy was because he often felt that he was connected to Royal Sister by blood. When they were together, he could know what she was thinking with a glance or a movement. He could know whether she was happy or not. But just now, this connection was broken. He could not feel it at all. This realization made him almost crazy, and he could no longer maintain his calm. At this moment, he took out a bunch of banknotes from his chest and threw them out. Many people subconsciously went to pick them up, but when they saw the denomination, they were stunned. They exclaimed and scrambled to grab them. The scene became noisy. At this moment, Lo Chi suddenly pulled out his sword. With a whoosh, a cold light flashed, and the other guards behind Gong Dai also pulled out their swords. He coldly looked at the group of people kneeling on the ground. This biting, cold, murderous aura made them stop scrambling for the banknotes. They all knelt there anxiously. In their hearts, they understood that the man in front of them was not the child of wealth sent by the Bodhisattva, but the god of death. Speak. Did you see a young woman just now? Young woman? How could there be a woman in this rundown temple? No one spoke. Gong Dai pulled at his collar and was a little annoyed. At this moment, his eyes fell on a thin man. Lo Chi quickly went forward and pulled him up, scaring him until he screamed. Shut up. If you scream again, I'll cut off your tongue. Luo Chi threatened him in a low voice, and he quickly shut his mouth. His eyes darted around as he looked at them in fear. Gong Dai pointed at him and said to the crowd again, Is there anyone who is the same height as him, male or female, who barged in the middle of the night? At this moment, the kind-hearted little old man secretly raised his head to take a look. With one look, he was shocked. Just now, he was sleeping under the tree and came in when he heard the commotion. Then, so many things happened. It seemed that these people were here to look for someone, and this thin and small man was actually as tall as that strange young man. Could it be that they were here to look for that young man? His surprised expression did not escape Gong Dai's eyes. Lo Chi threw the man down and lifted the old man up again. Speak. Did you see anyone suspicious? Lo Chi asked coldly. The little old man was a little hesitant and scared. He was afraid that these people were here to seek revenge. If he spoke, wouldn't he be harming others? But he saw so many banknotes, the denomination, he had never seen before in his life. Perhaps if he said that the nobles casually gave him a banknote as a reward, it would be enough for him to live without worry. Thinking of this, he was a little ashamed, but he nodded firmly. Yes. Gong Dai's eyes lit up and he hurried forward. His aura was so strong that it made the little old man breathless. But Gong Dai did not care. He looked at him with a burning gaze and tried to use a calm tone to ask, Is that person still here? Thinking that the young man was very uncomfortable and had slept in the temple, he must still be here, so he nodded again. He should still be here. Where? Gong Dai grabbed him and turned him around, making him look at the crowd on the ground. Raise your heads. At his command, everyone shrank back in fear and quickly raised their heads. Gong Dai looked at them with a complicated expression, then asked the old man expectantly, Look carefully, that person. Who is it? Chapter 203. When the little old man heard this, he trembled as he looked at the people kneeling on the ground. These people were also a little afraid. Although they were forced to raise their heads, they did not dare to look into his eyes. This was because Gong Dai's aggressive manner did not look like he was looking for family, but more like he was seeking revenge. Although they were not the people Gong Dai was looking for, the fear of power made their eyes avert, making them feel very uneasy. Afraid that he could not see clearly, more than a dozen people holding torches came closer. Under the flickering flames, the little old man tried his best to identify the person. Previously, as there was no fire, he could only see the person coming through the moonlight. It was a youth in ragged clothes, but his eyes were clear. He was very different from the others. He believed that he would definitely find him, but when he looked at them one by one, he felt that they were not him. How could these cowering people be the youth from before? So he did not speak. Under Gong Dai's pressure, large beads of sweat rolled down his face and fell into his eyes. He could not help but rub his eyes before opening them again to look. Time passed bit by bit. No one in the dilapidated temple dared to make a sound. This youth was obviously an influential person. If they angered him, it was not impossible for him to kill them all. Therefore, the trembling old man was like a little demon under the king of hell. Whoever he pointed out would be on the king of hell's list. But after waiting for a long time, even Lo Chi was getting impatient. Did he recognize who it was? At this moment, the old man suddenly knelt down with a thud. He sprawled on the ground and said with a trembling voice filled with despair, Lord, he's not here. There's no such person here. His words were like pouring a drop of ice water into a calm lava lake. Even those commoners who did not know martial arts could feel that at this moment, Gong Dai's killing intent had exploded and spread. No. Gong Dai's voice was very calm. He lowered his head and looked at the old man who did not even dare to cry. He asked in a puzzled tone, "But just now, you clearly said that there was." The old man opened his mouth, but no words came out. Gong Dai closed his eyes for a moment. When he opened them again, he reached out and grabbed the old man. The old man's head was stuck in Gong Dai's hand, and all he needed to do was squeeze. That was enough to make him explode. The old man was so scared that his face was drained of all color. His whole body was shaking like a sieve. The feeling of impending death made him wish he was already dead. It was better than waiting for death in fear like this. He shouldn't have been greedy. If he hadn't said that he wanted to identify the culprit, he wouldn't be on the verge of death now. On the other hand, Gong Dai's aura surged, and his black hair fluttered without any wind. Clearly, he wanted to kill the person in his hand, but under his rage, he still had a trace of reason left. The royal sister doesn't like killing people. If she was here, watching him kill someone in a fit of rage, she would be unhappy. She would be unhappy. Gong Dai only felt a metallic taste in his throat. He covered his chest with one hand and swallowed it. After Ranchi, he threw away the old man in his hand and looked at the people on the ground again. At this moment, his eyes were scarlet red, but deep in his eyes, there was sorrow. Wherever his gaze landed, there was no one who didn't shudder. These cowering eyes were not the eyes he was looking for. This thought made him want to kill all these people. Perhaps he could kill them one by one. The royal sister would come out on her own. Why doesn't she want to see me? It had been more than a year. Did she know how much he missed her? She didn't know. Gong Dai's murderous aura gradually disappeared, and in its place was a pain that was hard to ignore. Even though he was expressionless, the longing and disappointment in his eyes made these people gradually understand that this young man wasn't seeking revenge. Instead, he was looking for someone very important to him. Who was this person? No one said a word. Gong Yimo looked at Gong Dai with a face full of fear. That fear was faked, but also not faked. It was as if her appearance had completely changed, and only her heart still had a trace of clarity. Gong Dai, this person was a trace of concern that she had planted with her own hands. Because she had no blood relatives in this world, Gong Dai gradually became her spiritual sustenance. But she had no heart for love. Moreover, once Gong Dai was involved, it would inevitably involve Gong Che. She didn't want to be sandwiched between the two of them. Her whole person was surrounded by love and hatred, and it would complicate a simple matter. "So, I'm sorry," she silently said in her heart. After a while, Gong Dai looked up and smiled. His smile was extremely sorrowful, causing everyone present to forget their fear and look up at him. Then, Gong Dai looked at the crowd and turned to leave. The corner of his black robe fluttered, and the flood dragon totem outlined with gold and silver threads seemed to come alive in the firelight. Gong Yimo tilted her head and looked at it, only feeling that fate was very interesting. And Gong Dai, he didn't give up. Since the royal sister wasn't here, then he would go somewhere else to look for her. He would definitely find her. Even if she didn't accept him, it didn't matter. There was still a lot of time. He could do it. After Gong Dai left, the rest of the people quickly followed. The people in the dilapidated temple were silent for a moment. Seeing that those people had really left, they hurriedly scrambled to snatch the banknotes. Gong Yimo blended in among them, remaining calm and collected. The commotion became louder and louder. Because of the unequal distribution of the loot, the people were fighting together. It was very funny. She really wasn't here. In the dark, Gong Dai stared at the group of people. Unexpectedly, no one was acting strangely. No matter how much a person disguised, it was impossible to disguise to this extent. Therefore, Gong Dai gritted his teeth and decisively gave up on this place. This time, he really left. Feeling that Gong Dai's breath had disappeared, Gong Yimo then retreated. Now, her realm was much higher than Gong Dai's. The difference between the 5th and 6th level could be said to be a watershed. Therefore, she firmly held the initiative and walked in with ease. Looking at the red-eyed people in the dilapidated temple and the kind-looking bodhisattva in the middle, she smiled slightly and pulled herself out, jumping out of the window. As for Gong Dai, he only realized after walking for a while that something was wrong. Oh no! He actually forgot such an important thing. Lo Chi was just about to ask when he saw Gong Dai rushing towards the dilapidated temple like the wind. As he ran, he scolded himself for being so stupid in his heart. Just now, those people said that they felt a celestial wind blowing past them and that they felt relaxed. That could very well be the phenomenon caused by Royal Sister's advancement in realm. When he broke through to the 5th level, because the murderous intent in his heart was too strong, he released his inner energy and destroyed the house like a sharp blade. However, Royal Sister was different. Her cultivation focused on the state of mind. Once she was calm, success would follow naturally. Therefore, the phenomenon caused by her advancement would definitely be different. It must be as those people described just now. Therefore, they mistakenly thought that it was the Bodhisattva's manifestation. She had just broken through, and her realm was not stable yet. Therefore, she would definitely not move. Those people mistakenly thought that he appeared when the Bodhisattva manifested. Time was tight. Therefore, Royal Sister must have been in the dilapidated temple just now. Chapter 204. No matter how fast he was, it was too late. There were only red-eyed people in the temple. Gong Yimo couldn't still be there. Gong Ju's sudden intrusion caused the people in the temple to quiet down again. Their hair buns and clothes were in a mess. Some people tightly clenched the money in their hands, while others were full of anger because they didn't manage to snatch it. But all their emotions turned into fear when they saw Gong Dai. Even if the money they snatched just now was his, Gong Dai didn't say a word. He just stared at them coldly. They didn't dare to move and let Gong Dai's prying eyes slide past them one by one. Gong Dai's memory was amazing. He actually matched their faces with the faces in his memory. He used the most primitive method to check if anyone was missing. Although there was no light in the temple, the moonlight was very bright. He actually realized that there was a face missing. His brain automatically zoomed in on that person's face. It was a face covered in dirt. The pair of eyes were turbid and anxious. It was obviously a beggar, but the facial features were very similar to Royal Sister's. Why didn't he notice it just now? What was more frightening was that if he didn't compare them one by one, he wouldn't have remembered this person at all. It was as if he didn't even appear in his memory. This was a situation that had never happened before. Royal Sister, how did she do it? Gong Dai became more and more uneasy. After confirming who it was, he turned and rushed out again. At this time, Lo Chi and the others also caught up. Your Highness, do you have any orders? Quickly go and tell the Crown Prince that Royal Sister has disguised herself as a man. She's about 20 years old. Also, a normal inspection won't be able to tell. She must be searched. Yes. Lo Chi accepted the order and quickly left. Gong Dai frowned slightly. There was no other way. He could only join forces with Gong Che. Now, he could only hope that with Royal Sister's lazy personality, she wouldn't change her disguise in a short period of time before he recognized her. But he was about to be disappointed again. When Gong Yimo came out of the dilapidated temple, he walked leisurely while wiping the traces on his face. Her goal was clear at this time. Since the land route couldn't work, she could only take the water route. It just so happened that she was dirty and needed to wash up. At the same time, Gong Dai also thought of this. Not far from the Xingwang Temple was the moat of Wancheng. If there were guards everywhere on the land route, the Royal Sister would most likely take the water route. This was because the waterway map of the entire Daiyu state was in her mind. She definitely wouldn't let it go. The moon was bright and the stars were sparse. Gong Yimo threw away all the dirty clothes and didn't put them into the space. Then, she went into the water step by step. Although it was summer, the water at night was still a little cold, causing her white jade-like toes to tremble. Then, she steeled her heart and stepped in. He gritted his teeth and jumped into the water. Wancheng River was a tributary of the Yellow River. The water quality was still quite clear. If one walked along this river, they could get out of the city at both ends. But she wasn't in a hurry. She opened her mind and immersed herself in the water. After familiarizing herself with the water temperature, she felt like she had turned into a fish. It was as if she could breathe in the water. She was too anxious just now. She only had time to restrain her essence and didn't have time to stabilize her realm. Now that she was in the water and immersed in nature, she could achieve twice the result with half the effort. But not long after, before she could enter a meditative state, she heard footsteps from afar. Gong Yimo opened her eyes and plunged into the water. She held her breath and focused on the water surface. Gong Dai rushed here and found the clothes that Gong Yimo had thrown away. Royal sister. She really took the water route? Gong Dai didn't hesitate to continue chasing. Wancheng River had two directions. One led to the next town, and the other led to the wilderness. And the town was already guarded by the crown prince. Royal sister couldn't go to the town. So Gong Dai ran in the other direction, leaving Gong Yimo speechless. Sometimes, it was a kind of pain for someone to know you too well. But now, the crown prince had sent troops to find her. If she appeared again, it would only aggravate the situation. So even if she was unwilling, she still followed behind Gong Dai and swam in the direction of the wilderness. At this moment, one of them was on land, while the other was underwater. Luckily, she had already reached the 6th level of heaven and man is one. Otherwise, she wouldn't have been able to hold her breath for so long. Now, she only hoped that Gong Dai didn't find any traces of her after searching for a while. So, he thought that he had made a mistake and chased in the opposite direction. Only then would she be able to breathe a sigh of relief. Gong Dai was very anxious at this moment. Royal sister had grown too quickly, and now, she had completely cut off the connection between them. This made him even more uneasy. He could only find her as soon as possible. He had to find out the reason behind all this. Otherwise, how could he calm down? What was the world under the water like? Gong Yimo swam, along with the flow of the water. She was like a fish, moving according to the rhythm of the water. She was obviously running away, but because of this wonderful experience, she became tranquil. It made it harder for people to notice that she was actually in the water. Sometimes, she would even look at the running Gong Dai through the shadows of the water and sigh faintly. Why was he so persistent? In this world, there was no lack of people. Many things that were gone would never be found again. But people were different. When one person left, there would be countless people to replace him. At this moment, Gong Dai's figure suddenly staggered. He covered his chest and knelt down on one knee. Earlier in the dilapidated temple, he had forced himself not to kill people, which had caused his blood to boil. Later, when he found out that he had missed out on the royal sister, he couldn't calm down. And now, he was running at lightning speed, full of anger. Finally, because of his unstable blood and chi, he knelt on the ground. He couldn't help but angrily hammer the ground, his chest heaving up and down violently. Damn it! Why was it like this? Why was he so weak? Why? His hand covered his chest again, and he closed his eyes. He really couldn't feel any connection with her. This realization made his chest ache. What had happened to the royal sister? Gong Yimo also felt a little uncomfortable at this moment, as if her chest was stuffy. She knew that because she and Gong Dai practiced the same martial arts and had always understood each other, their hearts and minds were interlinked. In some aspects, they could sense each other like conjoined twins. Therefore, she hurriedly calmed herself down, not wanting to be influenced by Gong Dai. Gong Ju, on the other hand, didn't notice the slight change. As long as he thought of Sister Gong's superb disguise technique, he felt scared. If he couldn't find a way to break it, he might not be able to find her in this lifetime. He couldn't have her. Then he would live like this. What was the point? And what was the point? Under the intense stimulation, his chest ached. He couldn't hold it in any longer and spat out a mouthful of blood. Gong Yimo also suddenly felt a pain in her heart, and she panicked. It almost made her disheartened. Gong Dai, why did he spit out blood? Not being able to find her, was it something so difficult to accept? At this moment, his unstable emotions made Gong Dai raise his head to look at the water. He felt it. Chapter 205. Although it was only for a moment, he could feel that his royal sister was right beside him. She was not far from him. He wiped the blood from the corner of his lips and stood up abruptly. He looked around and his gaze fell on the water surface once again. Under the moonlight, the surface of the water sparkled and flowed slowly. Under the water, Gong Yimo did not dare to move at all. She even had a misconception that Gong Dai had discovered her because of her momentary lapse in concentration. Very quickly, her nightmare became reality because Gong Dai had actually jumped into the water. The water splashed everywhere and under the moonlight. It looked like broken starlight dancing around. However, Gong Yimo could not appreciate this. She quickly retreated, but it was too late. A pair of large hands. They fiercely grabbed her shoulders, and she was forced to be lifted up. "Caught you." His cold and unique voice rang in her ears. At this moment, Gong Dai's entire body was drenched. However, his pair of sparkling eyes sized up Gong Yimo, and he could not get enough of her. He could not bear to blink no matter how hard he tried. All the depression in this moment was dispelled. All the resentment and pain of yearning were soothed at this moment. His royal sister was finally in his hands. Gong Yimo seemed to be burned by his intense gaze and subconsciously used her hand to cover his eyes. God knows, she was not wearing any clothes. However, before she could do anything, she was already tightly pulled into Gong Dai's embrace. That strong heartbeat, Gong Yimo could clearly hear it. Gradually, her heartbeat, which had slowed down because she had immersed herself in nature, gradually recovered and intertwined with his heartbeat. Thump, thump. It was as if there was some kind of resonance. This kind of intimacy made Gong Yimo's face quietly turn red. Even she did not know what was going on. She had clearly said that she would not be moved. So why did she feel at a loss? "I feel it." Gong Dai suddenly sighed in her ear. "I feel your presence again." He let go of Gong Yimo and pointed at her chest, then at his own heart. "There's a connection between this place and this place again." At this moment, Gong Yimo didn't know why, but she felt a lump in her throat. She blinked but couldn't speak. Gong Dai looked at her in a daze. His royal sister had grown up again. Her eyebrows and eyes were more and more beautiful, especially under the moonlight. The water droplets on her hair fell on her bare shoulders and directly slid into the water. Her skin was like cream and her beauty was like jade. At this moment, her eyes were bright as she looked at him timidly. This was still his royal sister. She hadn't changed. If there was a change, it would be that she had become more attractive to him, making him want to touch her more and more. "Gong Dai, why do you have to find me?" Gong Yimo took a few steps back, hugged her chest, and asked with a sigh. "It's been more than a year. Haven't you changed at all?" She was referring to his heart. Why hadn't he changed? Could it be that a year was too short? "I've changed," Gong Dai said in a low voice. When she took a step back, he approached her and forced her to the lakeside. Gong Yimo couldn't help but look up at him. "Since you've changed, then why are you still?" "I've become more in love with you." He said the last 4 words by her ear. His tone was joyful, but more than that, there was bitterness. After so many days and nights, not only did it not fade away, but it also became clearer in his description of his longing. Her every frown and smile was just like before. "I've changed. I've become crazy about you. I've become so in love with you. I can't even recognize myself anymore." He gently pressed his forehead against Gong Yimo's forehead. He closed his eyes and their breaths intertwined. At this moment, he felt very happy and satisfied. Just a moment ago, he was still in pain, but now, he was filled with sweetness. "When I was 9 years old, I thought that you were just a momentary infatuation for me. Very soon, I would correct everything. Unfortunately, I didn't. When I was 11 years old, I thought that a long separation would fade away this infatuation. Unfortunately, I didn't. When I was 14 years old, you left me. I tried my best to become stronger, to mature. At that time, I thought that I could endure this longing, but I couldn't hold it in anymore. Do you know how painful it is to miss someone? Sometimes, even breathing is painful. I really wish that you were by my side, somewhere that I can touch." So when I miss you, I followed what you said before and went to decorate the imperial residence. Now, it's already very beautiful. Didn't you say that you wanted a home? That's our home. When he said this, he couldn't help but kiss Gong Yimo's lips. At this moment, the wind calmed down, the water calmed down, and his heart also calmed down. That soft touch was just as beautiful as the dream, making him indulge in it. As their lips and teeth intertwined, he kissed and whispered at the same time. I thought that I was already very strong, and they were all afraid of me. I also worked very hard, and always wanted to become even stronger. But I don't know why. When I met you, I panicked. I became worried about my gains and losses. I became cautious. I became compromising. His voice became softer and softer, and in the end, it seemed that he was really wronged. After he kissed her, he reluctantly stepped back and looked deeply into her eyes, full of helplessness. But you made me like this, but I don't hate you. I don't hate you. Instead, when I see you, I'm happy. When I hug you, I'm satisfied. I'm probably incurable. These lingering words of love made Gong Yimo very resistant. She was a little afraid and wanted to step back, but behind her was a rock, and she couldn't retreat. Don't say any more. I don't want to hear this. But what if you don't listen? Only you can listen to these words. As he said that, a dangerous light flashed in his eyes, and he got closer to her again. Although they couldn't see anything in the water, Gong Yimo felt as if his gaze was scraping her whole body, and she started to tremble slightly. He smiled faintly. If you really don't want to hear it, then I'll do it for you. As he said that, he kissed her again without giving her any chance to protest. He wrapped himself around her tightly, his hands hugging her body tightly, but his breathing was very rapid, and it was obvious that he wasn't as calm as he appeared to be. That passionate anticipation, as well as the sweetness and gentleness with care, made Gong Yimo's action of pushing him away become hesitant. And even though he was so eager, he wasn't too impulsive. He seemed to have gathered all his strength in his hands and used that to suppress the desire in his heart, but also to greedily want more. And he had really grown up. Compared to when he was young, his words were more shameless. Perhaps this was a man's talent? Gong Yimo thought helplessly, but her heart was more conflicted. Really, she had never hesitated on important matters, so why did she become like this when it came to relationships? Was it just because he was Gong Dai? Chapter 206. Gong Yimo's quietness satisfied Gong Dai and made him a little uneasy. Every time she wanted to do something that made him unhappy, she would become very obedient. This made him gnash his teeth in hatred. Why didn't you resist? Gong Dai let go of her and asked in a low voice, You didn't push me away because you have me in your heart? Gong Yimo looked at him for a long time without saying a word. Her silence made Gong Dai's heart ache, but it was okay. He pulled himself together and asked again, Last time, you said that if I love you, I have to rely on my own strength. Now, I've caught you. He stared into her eyes. Will you still leave? He thought carefully, full of anticipation, just for her to respond a little. But when Gong Yimo saw his sincere eyes, she knew that he really had not let go of this relationship. She was silent for a moment and finally said slowly, I still have something to do. At this moment, the aura on his originally gentle body suddenly exploded. He grabbed her wrist tightly and did not let go. Can I ask why? Something to do? With such a reason, did she think that he was still a child? He tried hard to suppress his anger and resentment, afraid that he would hurt her. But he was more afraid that if she left, then he would really not be able to control himself and hurt her. Gong Yimo sighed. Under the moonlight, she looked lost, but she was still determined. Let's put it this way. Actually, I don't want to get involved in love, and I don't have the energy to stop the gossip. I don't want to bring you trouble. There's no trouble. Gong Dai quickly said, No matter what you bring, it's a gift to me, not a trouble. He hugged her gently as if he was hugging the entire world. His murderous heart actually gave birth to a trace of gratitude. I don't need you to stop the gossip. As long as you agree, I'll do everything well. Whoever dares to talk nonsense, I'll make sure that they die a horrible death. You don't need to care about anything. As for getting involved in love, isn't that beautiful? I'll treat you like a treasure and dote on you forever. Why don't you want to? At this point, he suddenly felt a little pained. Or is it because you're unwilling to do it with me? Gong Imo reached out and patted his back, sighing faintly. It's not directed at you. I won't marry anyone, and I won't love anyone. It's just that I've already made up my mind, and I treat everyone equally. Why? Gong Dai buried his head in her neck and questioned her in a deep voice. He was in so much pain, and his entire being was wailing because he couldn't get what he wanted. Why was the person he loved so bitterly unwilling to love him? She wasn't even willing to share a little bit of love with him. Instead, she was only willing to give him those laughable familial ties. Why? For some reason, Gong Yimo suddenly remembered the words she said before she died in her previous life. If there's a next life, I'll definitely make them suffer. She shook her head repeatedly to get rid of these thoughts, but then she remembered that before the war, when they were leaving, Gong Che had held her hand and said, no matter when he returned, he would never let her down. Afterwards, the image of Su Miaolan's victorious face flashed through her mind, as well as Gong Dai's unconcealed killing intent towards her. She shuddered. She suddenly remembered the vow she made before the Buddha. In her next life, she would never love anyone again. Yes, she would never love anyone again. If she didn't love, then she wouldn't hate, resent, or suffer. Sensing Gong Yimo's sudden determination, Gong Dai suppressed his bloodthirsty impulse and asked word by word. Even if it's just staying by my side and being loved by me, it's still not okay? He stepped back and suppressed all his pain. He forced a smile and whispered a request. You can choose not to love me. No. As long as you're by my side, being loved by me, that's enough. Can I even do that? Gong Yimo looked at him. He was becoming more and more like the regent in her previous life. He had monopolized power and seized power, and he had smiled and taken over her little by little. Some things that could be forgotten had long been forgotten, such as hatred. However, she couldn't forget, no matter how hard she tried, such as trauma. The most beautiful thing in this world was love. It wasn't because it was the sweetest, but because it had the shortest duration and the greatest risk. The more dangerous it was, the more addictive it was. Hence, she shook her head. Under the moonlight, her expression was cold and determined. She didn't need to be influenced by anyone. In this life, she only wanted to live for herself. Gong Dai's eyes gradually deepened and turned red. The hostility in his body was increasing and spreading. However, he had been suppressing it at a critical point. He had been suppressing it and hadn't exploded. In the end, he only asked one question. What do I have to do to make you belong to me? Gong Yimo closed her eyes and asked herself. Since he hadn't been willing to give up for more than a year, then she would just force him to. Hence, she forced herself to put on a cold face and said lightly, I've always belonged to you, but as an older sister. If you don't want to, we can still be strangers. Strangers? That one sentence made Gong Dai's face turn pale. The suppressed hostility seemed to have disappeared in an instant. Only fear and uneasiness were left. His entire heart felt like it was being cut by 1,000 knives. It was a heart-wrenching pain. He couldn't even believe that this was what the royal sister said to him. Strangers? In the water, he retreated, but he almost couldn't control his body and sank into the water. After a while, he steadied his body and pointed at himself as he asked softly, Strangers? Gong Yimo looked at his deranged expression and couldn't bear it. However, she gritted her teeth and didn't say anything. Because once she accepted Gong Dai, Gong Che wouldn't be satisfied. Moreover, they were brothers and sisters. With their positions, such a relationship would only be trouble for them. Perhaps in the beginning, they would be willing to solve these problems because of love. However, as more and more troubles came and threatened them, they would be fed up with it. When that time came, how would she deal with it? As for herself, she was the one who hated trouble the most. Hence, it was best to forget about this relationship. She didn't need it. She didn't have the time. Perhaps she didn't dare to try. Hence, she hardened her heart and said, "You and I are siblings. This is an undeniable fact. Perhaps you're not afraid of being maliciously attacked by others. You're not afraid of me, this troublesome body, bringing you endless trouble. You're not afraid of being entangled in love and hate. But I'm afraid." After saying that, she turned to leave, but Gong Dai held her tightly. He forcefully carried Gong Yimo to the shore. On the grass, he pressed her down tightly. As soon as they left the water and the wind blew, her body shivered slightly due to the cold. However, her eyes were clear and she ignored Gong Dai's pain. She was determined. "Who wants to be your brother?" He laughed louder and louder. "I just want to be your man. I'm not afraid of what you said. I don't care. Even if you're afraid, I'll settle it for you. Now, be my woman." Chapter 207. As he spoke, he actually pulled off his clothes. Seeing that he was serious, Gong Yimo was stunned and did not speak for a long time. He was very fast and his clothes slid down. However, his whole body was pressing down on Gong Yimo, not allowing her to escape. "I should have done this long ago. I shouldn't have let you go. I should have broken your wings and let you lie under me obediently." The more he spoke, the more excited he became. His eyes were shining and his black hair was hanging down. He was so beautiful. However, the pain and anger that could not be dispersed made him look extremely abnormal. Under the moonlight, there was a strange and twisted feeling. It was as if he was an unredeemable demon, using his beautiful skin to drag the world to hell with him. "You won't. The brother that I raised is not someone who will force me." Gong Yimo did not believe it. She did not believe that Gong Dai would really do that. If he really loved her, he would not force her when she was unwilling. Therefore, she only opened her eyes and looked at him stubbornly. She watched him take off his clothes one by one, and watched him kiss and bite her skin as if he was venting his anger. Instead of saying that the two of them were being intimate, it was more like they were venting. "Not brother. Not brother." He gritted his teeth in pain, but there was nothing he could do. It was a pity that he could handle it with ease in front of outsiders. No one dared to provoke him. However, she would only make him helpless. She was right. He would not force her, even if she forced him to the edge of the cliff. He couldn't do anything to hurt her in the slightest. Finally, Gong Dai stopped because she was very calm. She did not act rashly for him at all. This knowledge made him numb from the pain again. However, after the numbness, he still felt pain. However, he could not let go. Since that was the case, he could only stay calm. If one path did not work, there were other paths. He could not panic. As long as he could have her, he could endure the pain even if his bones were broken. Gong Yimo blinked and looked at him. However, she saw that his expression was indescribable. He looked calm, but he was extremely dangerous. Gong Ju also looked at her with a heavy expression. She once said that all problems have a reason, and finding the reason is the root of the solution. Therefore, he could not be ruthless, crazy, or unyielding. In the end, he greedily looked at her beautiful body. This body would be his sooner or later. Only by telling himself this over and over again would he not be driven crazy by her words. Only then could he calm down. Then, he picked up his coat and gently wrapped it around Gong Yimo. It was just like when she was young in the cold palace, wrapping herself in clothes with a faint scent of incense. It was just that she did it out of sympathy, but in his eyes, there was only deep love. Gong Yimo slowly let out a sigh of relief. Although she was now more powerful than Gong Dai, she did not want to make a move against Gong Dai, so she endured until he regained his senses. Fortunately, he did not disappoint him. While he was putting on his clothes, his hot breath landed on her face more than once. His fingers were stiff and extremely restrained. After helping her put on her clothes, Gong Dai put on his inner clothes and helped her up to sit by the side of Wan Shui. The summer night wind sent waves of coolness. Gong Yimo seemed to come back to life and took a deep breath. Gong Dai said in a hoarse voice, Royal sister, you once said that there is nothing that cannot be said to others. Words can resolve all conflicts. Then, please tell me, why do you reject me like this? He lowered his head. Gong Yimo could only see that the side of his face was tense. It was obvious that even though he had calmed down now, he was still on the verge of exploding. He was just trying his best to control himself and not hurt her. Therefore, she could not provoke him anymore. It's not that I reject you. Gong Yimo wanted to sigh again. She thought about how she had educated him back then, but she had also explained the reason. It was just that he had not listened. Gong Dai, have you ever thought about what kind of path you will take in the future? You have your own path. He said this sentence without thinking. Gong Yimo felt that this reason could not be explained any further. Then have you ever thought about what kind of path I will take? Gong Dai looked at her and thought, naturally I have my own path. Gong Yimo thought about the so-called war and raised her hand to point at the stars in the sky. I will change this world for the better. The world is very big. I don't know how far I will go and how many people will stand in my way. Gong Dai's black, jade-like eyes were stunned for a moment. He really did not understand why she would do this. She could be kind because she had the ability to forgive people. Therefore, this kind of kindness was also a kind of strength. But why would she want to do these things? This was not a thought that a woman should have. Therefore, I may bring more trouble in the future. Whether it is the infamy of violating human relations or the spying of weapons, in the future, I may encounter more complicated problems than these. For example, the people in the world do not understand, or the obstacles of those in power and so on. Gong Yimo saw that Gong Dai wanted to say something. She suddenly smiled and said, "Listen to me first. You are the only thing I care about in my life, the only thing I can rely on. That's why I don't want to bring these things to you. Without me, you could have lived a carefree life. But with me, every step you take will be difficult and painful. You might even die. A person's strength is limited. I believe that you love me, and I also believe that you can hold on for a long time. But I don't believe that you will hold on until the end." Yes, this was the reason why she didn't want to start. No man would be willing to get himself into trouble for a woman. In order to maintain their relationship, they could only inject happiness and not pain. They could only inject passion and not shock. Therefore, she would rather not start. Since she would not give up on her own thoughts, she would not bind another person's life, even if he was willing. You are not me, so how can you say that I can't hold on? You are not me, so how can you say that every step I take will be difficult and I may even die? Gong Dai asked softly, but it was obvious that he was not convinced. Gong Yimo smiled and said, "Because you are not 15 yet. People change. Your life is so long and there are so many variables. Your mind is even more fickle. I don't want to take the risk." Gong Yimo's words were like a bucket of cold water poured on him. Although he was disappointed, he could not refute it. Gong Dai sneered, "I don't agree with your conclusion without trying. In the end, it's just because you don't believe me." His eyelashes trembled as he lowered his eyes, hiding his unwillingness. She did not believe him. Gong Yimo was slightly stunned. But what she did not believe was not him, but her feelings. Seeing that Gong Yimo did not say anything, Gong Dai's eyes gradually filled with hostility. There was an uncontrollable madness. "If that's the case, royal sister, why don't you give it a try?" Gong Yimo looked at him. She saw an invisible aura surging around him. He stood up, his black hair flying. He looked down at her and smiled wickedly. "Stay by my side and give it a try. Otherwise, if you want me to let you go, I can't do it." Gong Yimo heard this and stood up as well. Compared to Gong Dai, her aura was gradually sharper. Her aura was long and calm, with a natural rhythm. "I won't stay. You have your things to do. I have mine too." Chapter 208. At the edge of Wanshui, Gong Ju stood opposite Gong Yimo for the first time. His whole body was covered with internal energy, and it was piercingly cold like a sharp blade. However, his expression was one of pain. He practiced martial arts every day, but not to deal with her. Gong Yimo smiled. "Come, You have things that you can't give up. I understand. I also have things that I can't give up. Now, let me see how much you've grown. Gong Dai could not possibly leave with Gong Yimo. Even if he wanted to, Gong Yimo had told him when he was young that if the gap between a man and woman was too big, there would not be a good ending. So if he gave up his authority, he would not have the qualifications to have her. If he did not give up, he would not be able to follow her as he pleased. That was a helpless situation. The same was true for Gong Yimo. She returned to his side. She still hadn't solved the problem of carrying a weapon. Her only option was to hide her identity forever and blend in with him. But that wasn't the life she wanted. Since both sides could not change their standpoints, it looked like they could only fight. Gong Dai was silent. He felt that although Gong Yimo's body was gentle, it was a strong aura. His eyes became clearer and clearer. He knew that the other party's realm had surpassed his. Although it was just a breakthrough, there was a qualitative change. But he would not admit defeat. He could protect her. So, he must keep her. The two of them finally exchanged blows. With this exchange, Gong Ju immediately felt the suppression of his opponent's realm. Although it seemed weak, it was in fact continuous. Gong Yimo was slightly speechless. Gong Dai was clearly lower than her by a realm, but every move and style of his made her expend some effort. Of course, it was because she had just advanced and her realm was not stable. But more importantly, it was because of Gong Dai's own diligence and talent. Gong Ju, does he still only sleep for 2.5 hours a day? She was afraid that the time he spent practicing martial arts every day was more than the time he rested. Under the moonlight, their clothes fluttered due to their inner strength. Although they didn't use any weapons, both of them were able to transform their inner strength. Therefore, even without the use of weapons, the surrounding trees and water seemed to be pulled and tossed about by gravity. When sand and dust filled the air, even the starry sky seemed to be covered. Gong Yimo gradually became anxious, because if they stayed here for too long and were discovered by Gong Che, it would be even more troublesome. However, no one knew how Gong Dai cultivated, but his moves were swift and fierce, and his aura was oppressive. He actually fought her to a draw. Gong Dai could clearly feel that Royal Sister had surpassed him. The only reason he was able to keep up with her was because he only attacked and did not defend. In the end, the two of them separated with a palm strike. Gong Dai retreated a few steps, while Gong Yimo landed lightly on top of a tree. This kind of Qinggong was unparalleled in the world. You really can't stay for me. Gong Dai was wearing a moon-white inner garment, and his expression was sorrowful. There seemed to be invisible blades dancing around his body. They were crazily tearing apart everything around him. His eyes were filled with deep sorrow and helplessness. He was like a trapped beast. Other than destroying everything else, he was destroying himself. Gong Yimo thought for a while, then suddenly looked at him and asked softly, "Are you willing to give up everything in your hands, conceal your identity, and follow me without any power or influence?" Her words were too much, but she wanted Gong Dai to see reality clearly. Don't be stubborn. Gong Dai was stunned. If he gave up everything to follow her, then what right did he have to stand beside her and own her openly? How could he have the strong confidence to chase away all the people who peeped at her? Under the situation where he couldn't even protect himself, what right did he have to protect her? He couldn't accept this kind of difference. They weren't husband and wife, but subordinates. So he hesitated. This wasn't what he wanted. Gong Yimo smiled faintly. Then you want me to conceal my identity, hide my appearance, be careful by your side, be protected by you, and then hide from other people's prying eyes? Her eyes were also filled with misery. In this life, she was born without any worries, but she didn't come here to be entangled in love. If she gave up love, she could still have a lot. But if she gave up her freedom, even her heart would be pulled into chaos. She would have nothing. You're not willing, and I'm not willing. So this is a knot that can't be untied. But she changed the topic and said, even so, it's not like there's no way. Gong Dai's aura calmed down because of her words. He sincerely asked for her advice. Tell me, what else can I do? Gong Yimo smiled condescendingly. This smile was absolutely beautiful. Her black coat fluttered, revealing her snow-white legs and glowing skin. She was like a seductive seductress, doing her best to entice him into indulgence. He heard her dreamy voice. You have to become the strongest person in the 4 countries. Everywhere you go, people will kneel and greet you. At least, you have to be above father. When she said this, she was thinking about his glory in his previous life. That was the path that belonged to him, to become a strong person, and not a romantic who was trapped by love. So Gong Yimo covered her mouth and smiled, continuing to provoke him. If you can't compare to father, how can I return to Dayu State and cause trouble for you? Jan this may be difficult, but you can wait for me to solve all the problems and return. It's just that, this is also difficult, but I'm not afraid. Gong Dai suddenly smiled. I'm not afraid either. His gaze met with Gong Yimo's. When their eyes met, both of them seemed to feel their hearts tremble. Towards her, he couldn't bear to part with her, but if he became the strongest person in Dayu State, she would be able to return to his side with peace of mind. No matter how difficult the future was, he wasn't afraid. Gong Yimo's heart relaxed slightly. His hard work made her heart feel like it had been lightly knocked by something. After all, he was someone that she had nurtured with all her heart. He had never disappointed her. Now, in Yuheng, I'm preparing to take over all the pawn shops to establish a golden chain, just like the pyramid I told you about before. Once this plan takes shape, the benefits it will bring in the future are unimaginable. However, the reason Yuheng is so successful is because the Yuheng Emperor is captivated by the second prince's mother. As a result, the Emperor's words are practically the law in the imperial court. If you want to do this in Dayu State, I'm sure you'll encounter a lot more obstacles. Even so, I still hope that you will do this. This is to prevent the Yuheng Emperor from becoming too ambitious in the future and extending his hand into Dayu State. Therefore, you have to be the first person to establish a golden chain in Dayu State. Gong Dai looked at her quietly. I can do it. Gong Yimo pursed her lips and smiled. Lu Yi is getting restless. I'm afraid that war will break out in the next few years. You have to be careful too. I know. Do you still remember that I told you to plant spies in the 4 countries and be the first person in the chain of information? I will remember every single word of Royal Sister's words in my heart. Then, I'm relieved. As she spoke, she looked into the distance. Her eyes were filled with longing. She didn't know how far she would go, but no matter which step she took, it wouldn't be peaceful. That was why it was interesting. She looked at Gong Dai again and smiled provocatively. Come, if you still want to stop me, let's fight again. Let me give you some pointers, just like in the past. Gong Dai suddenly smiled bitterly. No, this time, I'll watch you leave. Chapter 209. Gong Yimo was taken aback by his words, but he suppressed the bitterness in his heart, tried his best to calm down, and said calmly, You don't believe me. Time will prove that my feelings for you, no matter how much pain I go through, it will only be deeper and not shallow. The love in his eyes was so real that Gong Yimo felt like she was about to fall into his eyes and be unable to extricate herself. She pursed her lips and didn't say anything. And right now, I don't want to let you go either, but I can't lock you down. He closed his eyes. She was the only person in his life that he felt so powerless. His face turned pale, and he smiled bitterly. Since I can't lock you down, I can only try my best until I can lock you down before I make my move. So this time, I want to be free for once and watch you leave. Gong Yimo was shocked. She looked deeply into Gong Dai's eyes. He was obviously in pain, but he was willing to let go. Not only did this not make her feel relieved, it made her feel even heavier because of his deep feelings. She didn't know how to repay him. Aren't you leaving? Gong Dai suddenly looked up and smiled. His cold eyes were even colder under the moonlight. He was like a demon who had come back to life, and he already had the beauty of a peerless generation. He looked at her, blinked, and took a deep breath. If you don't leave, I'm going to regret it. Gong Yimo came back to her senses. She looked at him with a complicated expression, and with a light tap of her feet, she walked along the river. Looking at her leaving figure, Gong Dai wanted to laugh and mock himself, but he felt powerless. He sat down cross-legged and slowly closed his eyes. He couldn't stop her now, and there was no point in trying to. He might as well take the opportunity to shake her. Even if her heart only wavered for a moment, it was enough. The number one person in Dayu State? This road was really long, but he just wanted to keep going, Royal Sister didn't believe that he could persevere, so he did it for her. The Royal Sister was afraid of love, so he forced her to accept him. In this world, there was no one who couldn't be defeated, and no one who couldn't be moved. If he couldn't be moved, then it must be because he hadn't done enough. Gong Yimo successfully left the city by water. After leaving the heavily guarded Wan City, she turned back and silently apologized to Gong Che in her heart. One Gong Dai was enough to give her a headache. If Gong Che was added to the mix, she would definitely go crazy. Therefore, in the future, if they could avoid meeting, it would be better not to. The word love was really annoying. She felt that a few strands of her hair had turned white from worry. In the next few days, Gong Yimo finished everything she needed to do and prepared to go to Yuheng. At this time, she disguised herself as a man and walked on the streets of the border town. She had a lot of customs documents in her space. She had them from every country. In this era, it was too easy for Gong Yimo to sneak into other countries with electronic devices. The sun was just right, but she didn't know why she felt gloomy, as if there was something that she hadn't finished. So she wandered around the streets and conveniently brought a gift for Kim Yoon. At this moment, a beautiful woman bumped into her. Gong Yimo felt that she was reaching out to touch her purse, so she immediately grabbed her. "This young lady, it's not good to steal things." Gong Yimo smiled and whispered in her ear. When the woman saw that she was caught, she was shocked and flustered. She struggled a few times but couldn't break free, so she hurriedly shouted, "Someone come. I'm being molested. Save me." Gong Yimo was speechless, but she still remembered that she was in the image of a man, so she still let go of her. "This young lady, you were obviously the one who was caught stealing. Isn't it too unreasonable to play the blame game?" But that woman was a habitual thief, so how could she be reasonable? As she cried, she hurriedly grabbed someone and said, "Young master, save me. That person wants to molest this servant in broad daylight. I beg young master to uphold justice." Gong Yimo looked at the person she was grabbing and laughed. The other party was obviously a girl dressed as a man. Her chest was not tied up, so it was too obvious. But when that young lady heard it, she really believed it. With a cold face, she pulled out the whip on her waist and said, "Preposterous. Don't be afraid. I'm here. Let's see who dares to bully you." The thief saw that someone really believed her, so she hurriedly nodded and hid behind her, waiting for an opportunity to escape. Gong Yimo looked at that young lady with interest and laughed. "Don't be fooled by her. I don't have any feelings for her." Seeing her laugh carelessly, that young lady became even angrier. "Hey, you don't look like a good person. You obviously saw that she was pretty and framed her as a thief. I've seen many lechers like you. I, Long Hanyin, must get rid of this evil for the people today." When she said her name, Gong Yimo had a vague impression of her. But she was puzzled because this Long Hanyin should have died long ago. She died of illness, so why was she still alive? It seems that her rebirth had changed many people's lives. But why did she run out instead of staying in the imperial palace? She did not speak, which made Long Hanyin even angrier. She lashed out with her whip. When Gong Yimo regained her senses, she lightly stretched out her hand and caught it. She somewhat helplessly said, "This young lady, aren't you being too indiscriminate? Being so fierce, you won't be able to get married." When the onlookers heard this, they all laughed. Long Hanyin could only blame herself for not dressing like a man. What kind of good girl would dress up as a man in broad daylight? But Long Hanyin suddenly thought of Gong Dai's cold eyes. He still wanted to kill her, so Gong Yimo's words could be said to have stepped on her sore spot. Her eyes flashed with murderous intent. She suddenly pulled out her whip, and her moves suddenly became fierce. "Disgraceful. You're the one who won't be able to get married." Go to hell. Seeing that Long Hanyin was serious, the onlookers swarmed and dispersed. Murder. A woman is killing on the streets. Someone shouted, and Xiao Xingfeng, who was buying dry rations from afar, heard it. He secretly cursed. It must be his little disciple who was causing trouble again. Why did she use the word again? Because on their way here, his little disciple seemed to have eaten something. She wanted to poke her nose into things she did not like, so they walked for so many days before arriving at Border City. His thoughts were simple, so naturally he would not guess that Long Hanyin was angry because she did not get what she wanted. So she pulled people to vent her anger. He only thought that his disciple liked to fight for justice, so he hurriedly ran towards the direction of the sound. Gong Yimo did not dodge at all. She stood at the same spot and let her whip. But even so, that whip seemed to have grown eyes and did not land on her body. This was the advantage of the 6th level, to dissipate the force. Long Hanyin knew that she had met an expert and did not know how to end the situation. In the end, she saw Qiu Xingfeng's figure and hurriedly said, "Master, save me. This person wants to kill me." Chapter 210. Qiu Xingfeng saw from afar that his disciple was the one who bullied others and even made false accusations. He felt helpless. He flew down, shielded Long Hanyin behind him, and apologized to Gong Yimo. "Mister, I'm really sorry. My disciple is immature and has disturbed you." Qiu Xingfeng bowed politely, but Long Hanyin was not convinced. Why should he apologize? He molested a good girl in public and even framed her as a thief. He's obviously a shameless person. Qiu Xingfeng heard and looked at her in confusion. Is that so? Was there a truth that he did not know? Gong Yimo was already stunned the moment Qiu Xingfeng appeared. She actually saw him again, and in such a short time. Seeing that Gong Yimo did not refute, Long Hanyin said maliciously, "Of course. I whipped him just now because he molested me. He touched my hand." Qiu Xingfeng heard. He was too naive to understand the truth, but he still looked at Gong Yimo and asked again, "You really bullied my disciple?" Gong Yimo looked at him with a complicated gaze and pointed at Long Hanyin. "She's your disciple?" Qiu Xingfeng raised his head proudly. "Yes, she's the little disciple that I raised. She's the most important person to me." She felt as if she was hit by a stick. She was prepared, but when she saw this scene, she still felt uncomfortable. Long Hanyin was actually Qiu Xingfeng's disciple, his most important person, and she was just a stranger. But Gong Yimo was a person with a strong state of mind. The pain only lasted for a moment. She adjusted herself and said in a low voice, "Your disciple is lying. I didn't molest her. The girl who ran away was really a thief." "You liar. You're not only shameless, but also full of lies. I must beat you to death." Long Hanyin saw that someone was backing her up. She picked up the whip and wanted to hit again. However, he was stopped by Qiu Xingfeng. He was in a bit of a dilemma. He looked at Gong Yimo and then looked at Long Hanyin. Why was what this person said different from what his disciple said? Long Hanyin was stopped and glared at Gong Yimo with resentment. She didn't know why, but she hated this person. She couldn't wait to see him disappear. She pinched herself hard and squeezed out a few drops of tears. She said pitifully, "Master, don't you believe me? Am I, your disciple, such an indiscriminate person?" While Qiu Xingfeng was still trying to figure out what was going on, the crying on the other side became louder and louder. "A few days ago, someone tried to kill me, but you didn't take revenge for me. Now, someone is bullying me, but you don't believe me. What kind of master is he? I don't want you to be my master anymore." Her crying made Qiu Xingfeng panic. When he was young, Long Hanyin had always played with him. Why didn't she want him? Just because of this person? Thinking of this, he also had some resentment towards Gong Yimo. He hurriedly said, "Yin don't cry. I'll take revenge for you right now." As he spoke, he attacked Gong Yimo. He used his lightness skill and clawed at Gong Yimo. Gong Yimo flew back. Seeing Qiu Xingfeng getting closer and closer, she seemed to recall the time when they fought on the top of the mountain, At that time, she was tired of everything. She was tired of the same life every day. She said she wanted to go down the mountain, and Xiao Feng looked at her with a pair of eyes cleaner than snow, pleading softly. Can you not go? You're the closest person to me. What will I do if you leave? But at that time, Gong Yimo didn't listen. She wanted to go out and explore the world. How about I go with you? He seemed to have made up his mind and said this. But how did she answer at that time? She looked at his snow-white hand waving in front of her eyes. It was different from before when they were just fighting. This time, he used a lot of strength. At that time, she seriously thought about it and said, the outside world doesn't suit you. Someone as clean as you can only stay here and wait for me to come back. But you didn't wait for me and found a little disciple in the blink of an eye. Does that mean the person who was with you at that time was the most important person in your life? Is that the person you can give your life for, and it doesn't have to be me? You're really as pure as snow, and as heartless as snow. Gong Yimo slapped his hand away. Xiao Feng was caught off guard and was hit by her. He almost forgot that at this time in this life, he was only at the 5th level. Xiao Feng was stunned. For the first time, he doubted his own martial arts. Only his master could defeat him. Why did that man last time do it? And this time, this stranger could do it too? Long Hanyan suddenly got angry. She supported Xiao Feng and questioned him. Aren't you good at martial arts? Why can't you beat 1 or 2 people? Then why did you come to me? Go back to Mount Yunding to practice. Gong Yimo only made one move, so Long Hanyan didn't notice anything wrong. Xiao Feng lowered his head sadly. Gong Yimo couldn't bear it, but she closed her eyes, thinking that it was good for him to go back. He wouldn't be used by Long Hanyan. So she smiled coldly. I also think you're not good enough. Why don't you go back and practice? Xiao Feng was shocked. On one side was a master, and on the other side was a disciple who despised him. He pursed his lips and said, but I haven't got the fire cloud grass. Even if he wanted to go back, he must get the fire cloud grass. Gong Yimo now knew why they were here. Xiao Feng's master was born with blocked blood, so he forced himself to practice martial arts. He often had to take medicine to maintain blood flow. The fire cloud grass was one of the most important medicines. It happened to only be found in the north. So every time, Mount Yunding had to pay a high price to buy it. And it was priceless. No wonder they were here. It was also rare that Xiao Feng still remembered this when he was looking for someone. She didn't know that Xiao Feng came down the mountain to find his disciple under the guise of looking for the fire cloud grass. So when he was in the border town, he didn't look for long before giving up. Fortunately, he met Long Hanyan here, which reminded him of this matter. Otherwise, he would have to go back empty-handed. Gong Yimo saw that he didn't want to go back, so she didn't want to care anymore. She was ready to continue her journey. What the eye doesn't see, the heart doesn't grieve over. But when she heard that he was going to the hopeless forest in the border town to look for the fire cloud grass, she remembered that there was another medicine that grew with the fire cloud grass that she could use. So she wanted to go with him. Anyway, she was already here. But she glanced at Long Hanyan. She was looking at her with an extremely venomous gaze, as if she was the enemy who killed her father. So she gave up the idea. She looked deeply at Xiao Feng and turned to leave. She didn't expect Long Hanyan to stop her. Wait, bastard, don't you dare leave your name. Today's grudge, I will definitely avenge it in the future. Gong Yimo couldn't help laughing. Was there any enmity between them? So he ignored her and left, leaving behind Long Hanyan, who was filled with resentment. She silently remembered Gong Yimo's face in her heart, as if she had some kind of obsession. Chapter 211. In the hopeless forest, Gong Yimo yawned as she listened to the experienced herb gatherer talk about medicinal knowledge. She felt a little sleepy. Young master, if I bring you to the water cloud grass, will you really give me 100 taels? The herb gatherer was still worried, so he confirmed again. Gong Yimo took out a banknote from her sleeve and waved it in front of him. See this? 100 taels, it's genuine. Hurry up. Hey, come with me. I'll definitely bring you to it. Definitely. I know where it is. as he grinned. He let his imagination run wild. Hee hee, you're really my benefactor. When I have this money, I'll have my daughter's dowry. She always said that I didn't buy her nice clothes and hair ornaments. Hee hee, this time I'll buy a big basket of them. I'll change her clothes every day. Gong Yimo listened and couldn't deny it. Although Daiyu's state was considered liberal, the status of women was still very low. This old man sounded like a henpecked husband, which was rare. They chatted along the way and walked for a whole day. In the evening, they finally arrived at the location where the herb gatherer found the water cloud grass. At this time, the two of them were lying on a mound, quietly looking at the big tiger in front of them. Looking at it from such a close distance, it looked really majestic. The herb gatherer was so scared that his face turned pale. He knew there was a tiger here, but it was the first time he was so close. He quickly took out the medicine he prepared and applied it on himself. He didn't forget to apply some on Gong Yimo. I don't need it. I only want to ask you, are you sure there's it there? There is. I saw it there last time. Not only is there water cloud grass, there's also fire cloud grass. It's just that that's the tiger's territory, so I didn't dare to pick it. Gong Yimo nodded. Then wait here. I'll be back soon. As she spoke, she walked out. Hey, wait, the old herb gatherer shouted, but she had already run out. It's over. This person is dead for sure. When the big tiger saw someone running in, it carefully walked around her. When it saw that she didn't have any weapons, it angrily pounced on her. The herb gatherer was so scared that he quickly closed his eyes. It's over. 100 Tails is gone, and this person died at such a young age. It's too pitiful. But he heard a whimper and muffled sound. He opened his eyes and saw that the tiger had fallen to the ground, but its stomach was still undulating. It should have just fainted. Gong Yimo grinned at him. Hurry up and come. Hey, I'm coming. As he ran over, he stared at the tiger. He had clearly run past it, but he seemed to have thought of something and turned back. He pulled some branches and the like to cover the tiger. Gong Yimo looked at him, somewhat amused. What are you doing? Are you afraid that it'll be killed by hunters? He wiped his sweat and smiled kindly. This tiger's nature isn't bad. As long as you don't step into its territory, it won't hurt anyone. It's all thanks to it that the nearby herbs are growing so well. Because there aren't many people who dare to go near it, I can rely on it to secretly earn some money. Gong Yimo thought for a moment and slowly said, You can let a rabbit go because it won't hurt you in the future. But if you let a tiger go, it can kill you in the future. Aren't you making life difficult for yourself by doing this? The herb gatherer chuckled. This old man picks herbs for a living. Previously, I relied on it to occasionally pick some good herbs and live a good life. In the future, with the 100 taels that young master gave me, I won't be picking herbs anymore. I can even do some business. So, not only is it harmless to me, I'm indebted to it. Then what if other herb gatherers meet it? At this moment, the old man narrowed his eyes and said something thought-provoking. Then it's another karma. I shouldn't interfere. When Gong Yimo heard this, she was stunned. She was pulled forward by the herb gatherer in a daze. Looking at his graying hair, she suddenly smiled. He obviously had a hard time, but he still relied on his intelligence and worked hard to survive. Perhaps everyone had great wisdom in their hearts. It was just that some people were good at summarizing things, while others weren't. But for those who weren't good at summarizing things, their lives might not be uninteresting. Soon, they saw a large patch of fire cloud grass. And among the fire cloud grass, there were several strands of water cloud grass, red and green, full of vitality. This strange scene made Gong Yimo's reverence for nature deepen. Deep in her heart, she felt a trace of gentleness. That was a gift from Mother Earth. Just a little bit was enough to fill one's heart with joy. The herb gatherer smiled and said fawningly, Young master, these herbs all belong to you. But for these fire cloud grass, can I take 2 strands? His wife had a cold body and suffered from back pain all year round. Eating this could cure her illness. This was a rare good thing. It couldn't be bought outside even if you had money. Gong Yimo didn't care. She gestured for him to do as he pleased. and then gave him 100 taels of silver. He was full of joy. He held the money tightly in one hand and carefully held the 2 strands of fire cloud grass in the other. He thought to himself, today was a big harvest. Then, he gratefully said goodbye to Gong Yimo and hurried down the mountain. He wanted to tell this good news to his wife and daughter. Gong Yimo smiled and shook her head. She lowered her head and continued to pick the herbs. She didn't know much about medicine, but she knew that this thing could cure Gong Che's heart disease. She had looked for it before, but didn't see it. This time, she heard Xiao Xingfeng say that there was fire cloud grass here, so she wanted to try her luck. Looking at the green plant in her hand, Gong Yimo sighed softly. She couldn't respond to Gong Che. So, this was her compensation for Gong Che? It didn't seem good. She was in a dilemma. At this moment, a scream was heard. Gong Yimo knew that it was the herb gatherer. Thinking, she quickly ran over to take a look. Her eyes turned red when she saw it. Long Hanyan ended the old man's life and snatched the fire cloud grass from his hand. The poor old man died with his eyes wide open. When he died, he still held the 100 taels of silver in his hand, as if he was afraid that it would run away. Unfortunately, he couldn't use it anymore. Old thing, you don't know what's good for you. I gave you money and you didn't sell it. You just want more money, right? Long Hanyan pulled out the dagger and wiped the blood on his clothes. She looked at him with disdain, but she really misunderstood. The old man didn't want to sell it not for money, but because his wife also needed it. Unfortunately, Long Hanyan suppressed the anger in her heart and refused to listen to him. Xiao Xingfeng saw that she killed people just like that, and for the first time, a trace of anger appeared in his heart. What are you doing? Why did you kill him? At this moment, Gong Yimo's angry voice was heard. I also want to ask, why did you kill him? Chapter 212. Seeing Gong Yimo, the anger in Long Hanyan's heart exploded. It's you again. What are you doing here? Gong Yimo didn't want to talk to her. She didn't even look at her. She killed the weak to vent her anger. She was so weak. Was she really taught by Yunding Mountain? She walked straight to the old man and found that he was dead. Her eyes darkened, and she looked at the money he was holding tightly. This was the money he used to do business. It was for his daughter's dowry. He should return it to them. So, she took out the money. Perhaps it was because he was watching from the heavens. The money that he was holding tightly was taken out by her. Seeing this, Long Hanyan laughed out loud. You don't look like you're short of money. You even took money from the dead. Shameless. Yenner. Xiao Xingfeng felt uneasy. He was angry because Long Hanyan killed someone. He called her, hoping that she would wake up. Isn't it? Long Hanyan snorted. She was trying to figure out Gong Yimo's intention. This person knew that we were coming to Hopeless Forest, but she came here before us. I don't know what she's up to. She was talking excitedly, but Gong Yimo didn't care about her at all. She just lowered her head and closed the old man's eyes. Then, she got up and walked towards Long Hanyan. The herb gatherers were familiar with this forest. The only threat was the tiger, but it was knocked out by Gong Yimo. He should have been safe and smooth on his way back. So, Gong Yimo didn't ask him to stay. He was so pitiful. He couldn't wait to go back and report the good news. He didn't expect that he would lose his life just because he was a little late in collecting the fire cloud grass. He died with his eyes wide open. Gong Yimo couldn't help but think, could this be karma? Seeing that she was getting closer and closer, Long Hanyan finally felt afraid. The murderous aura around her was like a huge rock, gradually pressing her down until she couldn't breathe. Long Hanyan quickly hid behind Xiao Xingfeng, but no matter how fast she was, how could she be Gong Yimo's opponent? So, Gong Yimo directly grabbed her neck and lifted her up. At that moment, her calm eyes overlapped with Gong Dai's murderous eyes. The scene seemed to return to that night. Long Hanyan's heart thumped. She knew that she really wanted to kill her. Help. She couldn't say anything. Xiao Xingfeng hurriedly said, Young master, please be merciful. My disciple is wrong for killing people. She's wrong. I will compensate her family. Shut up. This was the first time in 2 lifetimes that Gong Yimou spoke to Qiu Xingfeng in such a tone. She strangled Long Hanyin with one hand, and her cold eyes swept over Qiu Xingfeng, who was shocked by her words. Her expression was full of disappointment. Is this how your master educated you? What's your original intention? Bully the weak and let this woman bully others with her power? Is that why you practice martial arts? You disappoint me so much. Qiu Xingfeng's face turned pale, and he kept retreating. At that moment, he seemed to see his master scolding him. What was his original intention? He didn't know. His master said he was a martial arts genius, so he practiced martial arts. But no one ever told him why he practiced martial arts. Moreover, Gong Yimou said that she was disappointed in him. Even though he knew that the other party was just a stranger, he was still shaken by her words. It was as if there was someone very important to him, and she was disappointed in him. After that, Gong Yimou didn't look at him anymore. If he didn't lack intelligence and followed whoever he followed, then he wasn't worth her trouble. But this woman, she narrowed her eyes and had the intention to kill. She tightened her grip. The veins on Long Hanyin's forehead bulged, and her face turned red. Obviously, she could only breathe out and not breathe in. At this moment, Qiu Xingfeng attacked. He struck with his palm, and Gong Yimou stepped back. With a swoosh, he pulled out the sword beside him and turned to cut at her arm. Gong Yimou subconsciously let go and stepped back. Long Hanyin fell to the ground and curled into a ball. She coughed violently. Escaping from death didn't make her grateful. Instead, she looked at Gong Yimou with resentment. Gong Yimou looked at Qiu Xingfeng indifferently and smiled coldly. She killed someone. I want her to pay with her life. Are you going to protect her? Qiu Xingfeng gripped his sword tightly and said in a low voice, she killed someone. As her teacher, I have to teach her a lesson. Besides, you want to kill her to pay for the old man's life. If she dies, do I have to kill you to pay for her? You can try. A hidden sword slipped out of Gong Yimou's sleeve. She raised her eyebrows and smiled. If I die in your hands, I can only blame myself for not being skilled enough. Kill her. Master. Long Hanyin hugged her neck on the ground and said uncomfortably, kill her. Qiu Xingfeng was in a difficult position. Rationally, what he did was wrong. But now, if he didn't attack, the other party would kill his little disciple. He didn't want to. Even if he was angry with Long Hanyin, he wouldn't watch her die. So, he could only attack. Seeing him move, Gong Yimou also moved. She was now in a higher state than Qiu Xingfeng and had more experience than him. So, she wasn't afraid of him at all. In the last life, he practiced with her. In this life, it was time for her to teach him. When the two of them clashed, it was different from the last time she fought with Gong Yun. This time, she was much fiercer. So, Qiu Xingfeng, who was doubting his own decision, kept retreating. In the end, his sword was knocked away by her. He looked at his hand in a daze. He lost. And he lost so thoroughly. Long Hanyin couldn't believe it. Why was it the wind and nature technique again? Wasn't this the unique technique of Mount Yunding? Why did Gong Dai know it, and so did this stranger? She couldn't believe it and asked in a hoarse voice, who are you? Her heart was beating fast, because she remembered that Gong Dai's martial arts were taught by his royal sister. And some people even said that Gong Dai seemed to have ulterior motives towards his royal sister. She didn't believe it at first, but after hearing that woman's name from Gong Dai, she believed it. Hearing the voice, Gong Yimou looked at her, tilted her head slightly, and told her directly, I'm Gong Yimou. Long Hanyin's eyes widened, but she saw the other party showing a mouthful of white teeth and looking at her deeply. That's right. I'm the one who wants your life. Saying this, her sword stabbed towards Long Hanyin. And at the critical moment, Qiu Xingfeng blocked in front of her. After escaping death, she was finally afraid. She clung to Qiu Xingfeng's back tightly and looked at Gong Yimou with fear and hatred. It was really her. It was really her. Her disguise technique was really good. No wonder ants people couldn't find her. Qiu Xingfeng gritted his teeth and looked at Gong Yimo with determination. If you want to kill her, then kill me first. Gong Yimo curled up the corner of her mouth and smiled lightly. You think I don't dare? Chapter 213. How dare she? Qiu Xingfeng felt the murderous aura from her, but he still bit his lower lip and refused to move. Long Hanyin, who was hiding behind him, seized the opportunity and said, You can't kill me. I'm Princess Xiaoqing. If you kill me, Imperial Grandmother won't let you go. Imperial Concubine Long won't let you go either. Gong Yimo touched her hair and suddenly looked at her. I used to be the Chaoyang Princess. Besides, you're all dead. Who would know? Long Hanyin was scared and didn't dare to speak anymore. She only hoped that Qiu Xingfeng could block Gong Yimo for her. Qiu Xingfeng said in a low voice, She knows she's wrong this time. Please let her go. I promise I'll look after her. I won't let her kill anymore. Seeing Gong Yimo looking at them with a smile that wasn't a smile, Qiu Xingfeng's forehead began to drip with sweat. He saw that Gong Yimo didn't give up and said loudly, Or you can kill me. I'll pay for it with my life. When he said this, Gong Yimo looked at Long Hanyin and just listened without saying a word. Her reaction was really chilling. It was as if she wanted her to take the blame for Qiu Xingfeng. Such a person was really scary. She couldn't stay. She raised her hidden blade and pointed at them, saying coldly, Move. No. Qiu Xingfeng shook his head resolutely. His clear eyes looked at Gong Yimo. But he was so serious, and he was protecting such a person. Gong Yimo felt anger rising in her heart. It wasn't because he was protecting Long Hanyin, but because he couldn't tell right from wrong. She couldn't help but ask sarcastically, Did your master Immortal Wangji teach you this? Taught you not to tell right from wrong, to be partial to your fellow disciples, and to ignore everything? She couldn't understand why Immortal Wangji would accept such a woman. Didn't he only accept geniuses? Where was Long Hanyin? Qiu Xingfeng couldn't refute. He gritted his teeth. But she grew up with me. I can't let her die in front of me. Then there's no other way. Gong Yimo sneered. Because I must kill her. As he spoke, he brandished his sword to stab Long Hanyin. She screamed and retreated while Qiu Xingfeng fought with her barehanded. It was obvious that he was much fiercer than before. After all, he was still a martial arts genius. Once he got serious, Gong Yimo also had to deal with him seriously. The forest was torn apart by the sword chi and fist force, revealing a large open space. The color of the sky was also becoming more and more brilliant. Countless colors intertwined and overlapped. Only the last trace of the sun was left, and the sky was about to turn dark. Long Hanyin's legs went soft from the invisible killing aura in the air. She leaned against the tree and did not even have the strength to escape. She didn't want to die. She hadn't gone back to tell her aunt that this bitch was here. She hadn't married Gong Dai yet. She couldn't die. But after all, Qiu Xingfeng was one realm lower than Gong Yimo. No matter how talented he was, without Gong Dai's ruthlessness, how could he stop Gong Yimo? Therefore, at the moment when the sky suddenly turned dark, his sword found the right opportunity to stab Long Hanyin, who was behind him. If this stab hit, she would die for sure. Long Hanyin felt that death was approaching again. She let out a shrill scream. She half squatted and held her head, but she didn't feel any pain. She opened her eyes and looked up, only to see Qiu Xingfeng grabbing the hidden sword with both hands. The blood dyed his white clothes red. It was a shocking sight. Master, save me. Long Hanyin was scared silly. She stared at him and begged. She didn't want Gong Yimo to die. She only wanted to escape. Qiu Xingfeng's action made Gong Yimo's face turn ugly. The sword was grabbed by Qiu Xingfeng with both hands. Looking at the drop of blood, Long Hanyin didn't feel heartache. But she had been with Qiu Xingfeng for 13 years. She was decisive and disappointed in him, but her heart wasn't made of stone. I'm sorry. I can't let you kill her. He looked up at Gong Yimo. The innocence and innocence in his eyes reminded Gong Yimo of the time when he was blown up to save her. Her heart trembled. She almost let go of the sword in her hand. After Qiu Xingfeng said this, his thin lips were tightly pursed. Obviously, he wouldn't let go. His serious face seemed to overlap with the face in her previous life. At that time, when she died in his arms, she screamed and asked him why. He said, "I can't watch you die. I'd rather die." What a similar scene. But one was to protect her, the other was to protect the person she wanted to kill. Gong Yi's hand holding the sword trembled slightly. She felt sad and angry, but also sad. Was this karma? No. She wavered for a moment, then looked at Long Han Yin. This person was young, but she was inexplicably hostile to her. She didn't feel remorse like Li Ku, and at this time, her eyes were full of resentment. She couldn't stay. Staying would only cause trouble. So, Qiu Xingfeng, I'm sorry. Gong Yimo's eyes sharpened. She exerted strength in her hands. That narrow hidden sword couldn't be held tightly. So, Qiu Xingfeng held it tightly with both hands. The sword was still slowly moving forward. Gong Yimo could clearly feel the flesh on his palm being cut open. She gritted her teeth. She couldn't bear it. She took a deep breath and stopped. At this time, the tip of the sword was less than an inch away from Long Hanyin's nose. Long Hanyin was so scared that her face turned pale. She was too well protected. In the palace, she was protected by the Empress Dowager. On the mountain, there were no disputes, so she was lawless. But now, death was so close to her. She was scared. Her heart was trembling. She wanted to run, but the other side's terrifying aura made her body stiff. She could only watch as the sword fiercely cut through Qiu Xingfeng's palm and approached her. Sticky blood flowed down the sword because of Gong Yimo's strength. Long Hanyin, who was at the end of the sword, could clearly see the rolling blood drops falling on her clothes one by one. Can you smell it? Gong Yimo made up her mind and pushed the sword forward a little more. This time, she could clearly feel the friction between the sword and the bone. Qiu Xingfeng finally couldn't help but groan. He bit his lower lip tightly. His hand was still tightly holding the sword, unwilling to let go. Didn't it hurt? Why was he so stubborn? But it was useless for him to hold on because the tip of the sword had already touched Long Hanyin's nose. At that moment, the cold, murderous air seemed to pierce into her body through the tip of the sword. Her body was tightly pressed against the tree trunk. Her legs were in a half-squatting position. Her legs were trembling. At this moment, even her breathing stopped. Can you smell it? Gong Yimo asked again. This is the smell of your master's blood. You? Don't you feel any heartache? Chapter 215. When the little girl heard this, her eyes reddened. She quickly grabbed onto Gong Yimo's clothes and said anxiously, "Big brother, say something. My father isn't dead. How many times has he walked through that lousy forest? How could he be dead?" That's right. He had walked through it so many times without dying. But he had died the first time he walked with her. Was she destined to bleed everywhere she went? Gong Yimo was bewitched. Seeing that Gong Yimo didn't speak, the little girl couldn't help but burst into tears. At that moment, the house was very gloomy and oppressive, making it hard for Gong Yimo to breathe. At this moment, a fragrant smell wafted out from the kitchen. Gong Yimo was a little stunned. The adult and child were still crying, but she walked into the kitchen in a daze. She saw that the kitchen was very tidy, and bowls of vegetables were placed on the clay stove. They were all covered with bowls, and the chicken had just been put into the pot. It was obvious that they wanted to make soup, but they were interrupted by her arrival. The crying outside was still going on, but the moment she took the spatula, her panicked heart calmed down. The dead couldn't be brought back to life. She couldn't beg for their forgiveness, but at least she could make them dinner. This house was very small, but it was very cozy. Many small details showed that they lived their lives seriously, and they were a happy family of 3. But at this moment, the whole house was filled with sorrow. Money might be able to buy a lot of things, but life was so fragile. It could be gone just like that. She had seen too many deaths, and even she was prepared to die at any time. The only thing she could do was to not have any regrets. At this moment, she clearly heard the woman's cries. "Old man, how could you die? I was so fierce to you all the time. I didn't mean to scold you all the time. You can't blame me." There was also the sound of the little girl sobbing. "Father, I won't say that you didn't let me live a good life anymore. I don't want beautiful clothes anymore. Come back, Father." She tightened her grip on the spatula. She didn't know why, but she also felt like crying. How pitiful would it be for a person to be unable to enjoy life in this world, to be constantly floating in the midst of suffering, to die without even seeing the light at the end of the tunnel. Therefore, she couldn't have any regrets or unfinished words. Gong Yimo looked at the steaming soup pot and suddenly wondered if she would have any regrets if she died one day. After crying for a long time, they were tired. When they came back to their senses, they saw that Gong Yimo had already placed the dishes on the table one by one. They felt very upset. If it weren't for her, their husband and father wouldn't have died. However, Old Man Gao had told them that picking herbs was very dangerous and that there were tigers in the mountains. If he were to pass away one day, he only hoped that they could still live well. Therefore, they were usually very stingy and tried their best to save money. Unexpectedly, they were right. When the woman thought of this, she started crying again. Now, she had 100 taels. It was enough for them to eat for the rest of their lives, but the old man had never enjoyed a single day of happiness. He died just like that. How could she bear it? Gong Yimo finally placed the soup in the middle of the table, washed the bowls and chopsticks, and placed them one by one. Then, she said, "Are you hungry? Come and eat." Seeing that they didn't move, Gong Yimo looked at the table full of dishes and said faintly, "With such a sumptuous meal, isn't it a celebration feast? Now that he has achieved his goal, shouldn't you all celebrate for him?" Gong Yimo was referring to the old man earning 100 taels, while the woman noticed that Gong Yimo had taken an extra set of bowls and chopsticks. In a moment of sorrow, she tried her best to wipe away her tears and walked over. If the old man was here, he would definitely think so. She pulled her daughter, who was still crying, to sit at the table. Looking at the scene in front of her, she couldn't help but cry again. Usually, they wouldn't be able to eat such good food. Before the old man left, he had vowed that he would definitely get the 100 taels today. She then steeled herself to cook rice, thinking that even if it wasn't 100 taels, it would be fine. Usually, they would eat porridge, but now, they couldn't even eat a celebration feast during the new year. With the merit, they wouldn't have to worry about food and clothing in the future, but he was gone. Seeing that the two of them didn't move, Gong Yimo picked up her chopsticks and put some food into an empty bowl. "Treat it as a farewell feast. Don't you want to have your last meal with him? Eat, eat, eat. Let's eat." The woman wiped away her tears again and wiped her daughter's tears as well. Then, she really started to eat. The woman started to eat, but her daughter glared angrily at Gong Yimo and said in a hoarse voice, "It's all your fault. If it wasn't for you, my father wouldn't have died. Give me back my father." She threw her chopsticks at Gong Yimo, but the woman held her down. "Have you forgotten what your father said to you?" The woman was very fierce. Her eyes were red and swollen from crying, but deep down, they were filled with sorrow. The little girl knew that her mother was referring to her father's words. He said that he might die on the mountain one day, and if that day really came, he told them not to be too sad. At that moment, her heart was filled with anger and pain. She got up and ran to the room. The woman wanted to stop her, but she didn't have the strength to speak. She could only lower her head and eat without tasting the food. These were all the old man's favorite food, but in the morning, she only gave him a bowl of porridge. This soup was bland, and she didn't know if he would be hungry on his way to the netherworld. Gong Yimo lowered her head and ate. She didn't know how rare this meal was, and how much of a pity it was that the old man didn't get to eat it. She only thought about it, and then took out a banknote from her sleeve. "I know that money can't buy a life," I buried him in the mountain according to your customs and didn't erect a tombstone. As for this money, I only hope that you can live a better life in the future because he kept talking about you all along the way. It's obvious that he cares about you." Hearing this, the woman's tears fell. She pushed the money back and said angrily, "Thank you, young master. Thank you, young master, for burying him. I just want to know why such a good person like my old man died." Gong Yimo didn't hide anything. They had the right to know the truth. After hearing this, the woman couldn't hold it in any longer. She slumped over the table and wailed loudly, "It's all my fault. It's all my fault. If I didn't keep saying that my back hurt and my womb was cold, the old man wouldn't have been killed over a stalk of grass. It's all my fault." Gong Yimo said softly, "It's not your fault. I will avenge you all." When the woman heard this, she quickly looked up at her. Gong Yimo said, "I only chopped off 2 of her fingers this time, but the next time, I will take her life, so don't cry." When the woman heard this, she nodded and shook her head. After a long while, she finally stopped crying. "We can't accept this money." "Why?" The woman wiped her tears and said, "The old man said that people like us get rich overnight and people change easily, so 100 taels is the limit, and you promised to avenge us, so we can't accept this money." Gong Yimo couldn't help but sigh. "You're a sensible old man." As she said this, she personally poured a bowl of soup for her. The woman drank a mouthful with tears in her eyes and choked. "This soup, why is it sweet?" Gong Yimo also drank a mouthful and said with narrowed eyes, "Because life won't always be bitter. You've worked so hard for so long. It's time for it to be sweet." Chapter 216. When she left, Gong Yimo did not forget to leave behind 2 firecloud herbs before leaving. She did not know why, but after doing this, she suddenly felt enlightened. She seemed to have understood something, and the path in front of her became clearer. When Gong Yimo returned, Kim Yoon could clearly feel the changes in her. It was as if a luminous pearl had been polished into a purple pearl. Being with her made people happier. After passing Gong Che's when Han to Kim Yoon, Gong Yimo felt her body and mind lighten. Kim Yoon did not ask what she was doing, because he had been forced to a miserable state recently. His mother had been forcing him to choose a concubine, but he was unwilling. So, his mother wanted to find Yimo. His mother probably knew what he was thinking, but he also knew that Yimo's heart was not on this. Moreover, she did not belong to Yuheng. Time passed by slowly. From the blazing sun to the falling snow, more than a year had passed. Gong Yimo had just turned 17. Many things had happened in this year. For example, Yuheng's Golden Jade Bank had been established. It overthrew the many forms of banknotes in the past and introduced a new type of banknote that could be used throughout the country. It had annexed all the previous banks and turned them into the country's private property. Moreover, it was also Kim Yoon's private property. This kind of smooth and dominant scene was really a scene that other countries didn't even dare to imagine. The country was thriving day by day, but Yuheng's emperor's health was deteriorating day by day. No one knew what was going on, but he had been taking medicine to recover. However, his love for Yunjin did not change. Now, only Yunjin could enter the Golden Hall Palace to take care of the sick. It was obvious that he doted on her. In his current state, he naturally could not care about anything. Now, Yuheng's big and small affairs were all handled by Kim Yoon. Whether or not he was the crown prince did not matter much. Yuheng's side was smooth sailing, but Dayu State's side was much more tragic. In just over a year, 4 princes of Dayu State had died. 3 of them had been personally killed by Gong Dai, and Dayu State had also opened a state-owned bank just like Yuheng. However, Dayu State was vast and had abundant resources, so the original owners of the banks were much more unyielding than Yuheng. Furthermore, there were so many powers in Dayu State, and there were so many princes. If they brought the money with them to any of the princes, it would cause a massacre. Therefore, Gong Dai spent an entire year to take down these people. After killing a lot of people, he finally came out on top. He established Flourishing Age Bank. For a moment, Gong Dai was in the limelight. He even overshadowed Gong Cheng, who was worried about his son's death. He became the #1 person in Dayu State. However, due to the impending return of Gong Che, this momentum was somewhat subtle. Gong Dai used the bank to generate money, but he was still in the beginning stages. Therefore, he mainly relied on his previous business. However, Gong Che had built the canal. In the past few years, money had flowed in like water. He was also a reputable crown prince. The Liu family's rise was also very fast. Many people were wondering if the situation in Dayu State would change after Gong Che's return. Gong Yimo's fleet was doing very well. The profits from smuggling were huge. However, she believed that it would not be long before she could openly smuggle ships. Therefore, she was in a good mood every day. She was doing business on the water. The mines that she had previously explored were also on the right track. She also had a share in Kim Yoon's bank. Based on this, she was definitely the richest woman in the world. Gong Yimo was in a good mood. However, very soon, someone came to find trouble with her. Just as she was warming herself by the fire, eating snacks, and reading a book, someone from the palace came. She was originally curious because Kim Yoon had gone out. In the end, it turned out that they were looking for her. She calculated the time and realized that she had not been to the Yuheng Palace for 2 years. In the past, when the palace summoned her, Kim Yoon would reject them. Now that Kim Yoon was not around, she was a little stunned. It seemed like it would not be good if she did not go. Therefore, she reluctantly put down the snacks, tidied her clothes, and walked out. There were plum blossoms blooming in the courtyard. Large patches of blooming flowers were enchanting. Everyone could not help but stop to take a second look. It was said that these plum blossoms were transplanted by the second prince at a high price. Many of them had died. The ones that survived had all become part of Gong Yimo's courtyard. It was a beautiful sight to behold. However, when Gong Yimo walked out of the room, the eunuch who was in charge of announcing the imperial edict took a look. His gaze was no longer attracted by the plum blossoms. The emperor of Yuheng was lustful. There were countless beauties in his harem. Even the famous Madame Yunjin, who was now imperial consort Yun, did not make him so amazed. Time had brightened Gong Yimo's appearance. She was changing every day. Every change was towards a more beautiful direction. Even someone as beautiful as Kim Yoon would sometimes fall into a daze when looking at her. When she raised her eyes to look at you, you would feel that it was an honor to be reflected in her clean and pure eyes. It was said that one's appearance was born from one's heart. Gong Yimo was not only beautiful, but more attractive was actually a kind of temperament that could tolerate and transcend all things. This kind of special temperament was rare even for men. When it fell on a woman, even a eunuch like him could not take his eyes off her. He could not help but reveal a bright smile. "You must be Miss Shi? I have heard so much about you. I am under Imperial Consort Yun's order to invite you to the palace." A gust of wind blew. Gong Yimo shrunk her neck and shrunk her entire body into the pure white fur coat. She looked like a big milk cat. However, her actions did not make people feel that it was indecent. They only felt that a beauty should be so free and easy. Can I not go?" Her words stunned the eunuch who was delivering the imperial edict. Following that, Gong Yimo burst into laughter. In that moment, it was as if the winter sun had risen. "I'm just teasing you. Let's go." Only then did the eunuch return to his senses. He nodded repeatedly and followed. She dressed up neatly and did not need to change clothes. However, after the eunuch saw it, he was a little hesitant. There was no other reason than that this white fur coat was not very good. This white fur coat was worth 1,000 gold pieces. It was said that the second prince had spent a lot of money to obtain it. There were only 2 coats, one purple and one white. At that time, the imperial consort liked both very much. However, the always filial prince did not give her both. Instead, he let her choose one. The other one actually fell into this girl's hands. Therefore, he opened his mouth to remind her. However, he thought that this girl must be the second prince's beloved. Who was the second prince? He would definitely be the emperor in the future. This girl was so favored. If the imperial consort saw her, she would not make things difficult for her. Walking into Yuheng's palace, Gong Yimo was not in a good mood. Yunjin had changed. Although she did not enter the palace, she had many secret agents under her. Why did the emperor of Yuheng fall ill at such a young age? There were so many powerful and influential women in the harem. Why did they all end up in such a bad state? These things could not withstand deep thought. It was said that the Empress Dowager of Yuqi was struggling recently. She could only hope that Yunjin would not be the next Empress Dowager of Yuqi. If that happened, Kim Yun would be too pitiful. Chapter 217. Yunjin had arranged to meet her in Huiding, which was a pavilion in the middle of a lake. In this kind of weather, Gong Yimo was speechless. She sat there and hugged her small heater tightly, refusing to let go. There had been a few heavy snowfalls, so the view of the lake from the pavilion was still very beautiful. The roof tiles in the distance, the rockery nearby, and the frozen lake water looked like a sketch. With just a few strokes, it gave people a very natural sense of beauty. Seeing that Yunjin had not come for a long time, Gong Yimo leaned on the chair in the pavilion and looked down at the ice flowers on the lake. Is it beautiful? Surprisingly, Yunjin was the only one who had come. Gong Yimo turned back. At that moment, she saw surprise in Yunjin's eyes. However, she did not know if it was an illusion, but what she saw was more jealousy. She was still very beautiful, but now she was wearing a luxurious dress and had heavy makeup. She was not as beautiful as she was when they first met. "Greetings, Your Highness." Gong Yimo smiled and bowed. Yunjin almost had an illusion that they had not seen each other for a few years, but only for a few days. Yunjin accepted it indifferently and grunted. She sat on the stone stool in the middle of the pavilion. There was not even a servant to serve tea. In these few years, whenever I feel unhappy, I will come here for a walk. Do you think it's beautiful here? Gong Yimo nodded. The view is excellent. Yunjin smiled and said, Then if I push you into the lake, will you be afraid? Gong Yimo looked up at her, and a ray of light flashed across her eyes. You can try. Her words made Yunjin choke. The originally warm scene suddenly became tense, and there was even some unknown danger floating. Soon, Yunjin smiled again. After years of training, she was no longer the immature woman. Gong Yimo saw the shadow of Empress Dowager Yuqi in her. This consort was just joking. You are Yun's sweetheart. Because of you, Yun is even avoiding this consort. How could this consort possibly dare to do anything to you? In other words, without Kim Yun, what would you do to me? Gong Yimo giggled. There is no enmity between us, right? Her words were always like this. Sometimes, they were as direct as a blade, making people unable to resist. The smile on Yunjin's face was a little stiff. There is no enmity, but... She covered her mouth and laughed. But, I'm jealous of you. What are you jealous of me for? Gong Yimo sat opposite her with her hands on the stone table. She supported her face with her hands and asked in confusion. She was beautiful, and her casual movements were pleasing to the eye for no reason. Yunjin stared intently at her as she smiled. I'm jealous of your youth and beauty. I'm jealous that you can travel everywhere. I'm jealous that Yun likes you. When she finished speaking, a trace of resentment flashed through her eyes. It was so fast that no one could see it clearly. By the time she came back to her senses, she continued to speak slowly. In the past, Yun was so obedient. No matter what this consort wanted, no matter how difficult it was, he would give it to this consort. He was wholehearted and only treated this consort well. But ever since you appeared, Yun changed. He no longer only cares about this consort. With you in his heart became biased. When Gong Yimo heard her say all this with a smile, she didn't know why, but she felt her hairs stand on end. Since you're so afraid of losing his attention, why do you keep forcing him to get married? Yunjin glared at her. Her smile was like a snake in beautiful skin, enchanting and dangerous. Of course, it's because I want those women to force you away. That way, Yoon will be this consort's again. What a lunatic. Gong Yimo fell silent. Of the 30,000 women in Dayu State's imperial harem, she had never heard of anyone being forced to go crazy. As expected, Yuheng's imperial palace was better at tempering people than Dayu State. She knew that the emperor of Dayu State was brilliant. No matter how many people there were in the imperial harem, they couldn't overturn the heavens. However, Yuheng was different. A few years ago, it was even worse. Yunjin wasn't a strong-willed person to begin with. Now that she had reached this point, she was afraid that her insides were already twisted. No wonder Kim Yun had been sighing so often these past 2 years. She knew that this was the problem. Then why did you call me here? You want me to leave? No. Yunjin quickly rejected her and looked at her with her beautiful eyes. In the past, this consort really wanted someone to chase you away in this consort's place. But now, this consort hopes that you can marry Yoon. That way, you'll be like this consort, a bird in a cage. When the time comes, this consort will marry many women for Yoon, so that you can have a taste of how I feel. The last word, I was filled with resentment. However, when she said this, her expression was very normal. It was as if she was talking about the weather or something very normal. However, the meaning behind her words was terrifying. Gong Yimo knew that Yunjin was jealous of her freedom. She also resented her for stealing Kim Yoon's attention. After all, Kim Yoon did belong to her alone back then. The more brutal the imperial harem was, the more she missed the carefree time in the cold palace. Naturally, she hated herself even more. She was just like those mothers in modern times who had a child love-struck plot. It was just that this plot was forced out of her. Gong Yimo decided to provoke her and make her give up on this idea. She smiled slightly. Didn't Kim Yoon tell you? Tell me what? Yunjin looked like she was listening attentively as she quietly looked at Gong Yimo. Kim Yoon, Gong Yimo flashed a dazzling smile. Kim Yoon said that he likes me a lot. He even said that as long as I agree, he will only marry me in this lifetime. So if you want to find someone to share my love with, it'll be a little difficult. Her words caused Yunjin's face to twist for a moment. Gong Yimo stuck out her tongue inwardly and continued to lie. Also, he said that his mother had suffered too much in her life, so he can't repeat her mistakes. Therefore, he decided to only marry one person in this lifetime. He even said that he would only marry me. That's why I didn't agree and wanted to play around. He had no choice but to indulge me, so he kept rejecting the marriage. You still don't know about this, right? How dare you? Yunjin suddenly slammed the table. You want to marry Yoon like this? What a fool's dream. But her heart was even more twisted, as if there was a fire burning inside. Why was Gong Yimo able to meet such a good person like her son, but she could only meet such a disgusting man like Jin Sheng? Whether it's a fool's dream or not, don't you have any idea? Gong Yimo appeared calm, as if Kim Yoon had said so with certainty. Yunjin looked at her gloomily and suddenly shouted, "Shut up! Guards!" She ordered. Very quickly, people ran over and stood behind her. Those people were obviously the hidden guards set up by the Emperor of Yuheng to protect her, and they had already been firmly subdued by Yunjin. This person has offended her superiors. Throw her into the lake to wake her up. Yunjin said coldly with a venomous expression. Yes. Someone quickly tried to grab Gong Yimo, but Gong Yimo didn't even look at him and said, "If you don't want Kim Yoon to hate you, you can try." Yunjin indeed hesitated, but her face was still cold and hard. What a joke. Yoon is this consort's biological son. He'll hate me? Gong Yimo rubbed her stomach and said with a smile, "If you don't believe me, you can try." Her fearless look, coupled with her previous actions, made Yunjin's expression turn sinister. Her voice changed instantly. Could it be that you're pregnant with Yoon's child? Chapter 218. Gong Yimo almost spat out her food when she heard that. She had eaten too many snacks at home and touched her stomach. How did she get pregnant? She had said those words to scare Yunjin. Besides, she was right. She had worked with Kim Yoon on many occasions now. If Yoon-jin really did something to her, Kim Yoon would definitely not sit idly by. However, she rolled her eyes and said vaguely with a smile, "Then do you still want to touch me? If you don't want to touch her, then let her go home." Gong Yimo was all smiles. Wrapped in the snow-white fur coat, she looked like a cute little fox. Yoon-jin was infuriated by these words. She was speechless for a long time. She knew that this girl of unknown origin had ulterior motives. She was really pregnant. Wow, what a good trick. Yoon-jin gritted her teeth in anger. Ever since she had appeared, Yoon had not treated her as well as before. Take the white fur coat on her as an example. She had liked it so much and wanted both. However, Yoon was such an obedient child and had insisted on taking one of them. It was even her favorite white. Hence, when she saw Gong Yimo's clothes today, her heart was burning with anger and her words were ambiguous. She was fearless. Firstly, Yoon-jin was venting her anger. Secondly, she knew that as long as she did not go overboard, Yoon-er would not do anything to her. However, it was different now. This woman was actually pregnant with Kim Yoon's child. Thinking about how Yoon had been treating her better these few years, if they really got married, would Yoon still remember her as his mother? No. Her life was already hard enough. Yoon-er was her only son, and he was also someone who treated her well. He could not be snatched away. As she thought about it, her eyes turned cold and she said to the secret guard, "Throw her out." Yoon-ji knew that Gong Yimo was good at martial arts, but she looked down on women, so she didn't think that Gong Yimo was very powerful. Although there were many women living happily in the world, in front of Yoon-jin, only Gong Yimo could stimulate her the most. Because Gong Yimo had seen her at her worst, she also saw how sad she was now. Therefore, it seemed that as long as Gong Yimo disappeared, the past would never happen. Since that's the case, then disappear. Gong Yimo was stunned after hearing her words. Why did she still want to fight? She was pregnant with Kim Yoon's child. Seeing that those people were really coming over, Gong Yimo was very puzzled and asked, "I really don't remember any deep hatred between us. Why are you suddenly so hostile towards me?" Perhaps it wasn't sudden. Ever since Yoon-jin came out of the cold palace a few years ago, she could feel that Yoon-jin was hostile towards her, so she didn't want to see her in the past 2 years. Deep hatred? Yoon-jin smiled. In this gray sky, her heavy makeup was a stunning color. However, she touched her face. She said with a strange expression, "Do you know what kind of life I've been living these past few years?" Seeing that she had spoken and used the word "I," the secret guard only surrounded Gong Yimo in the pavilion and didn't make a move. Gong Yimo was all ears. "You don't know. Jin Sheng disgusts me so much. He has a weird habit. In the first year, I was living in hell. If I didn't grit my teeth and persevere, I would have been tortured to death in bed by him." Gong Yimo was a little stunned. She didn't expect to hear such words from Yoon-jin one day. Yoon-jin actually rolled up her sleeves in front of everyone. There were burn marks on her fair arms and some old wounds, but they were no longer obvious. Gong Yimo's expression turned cold. Yoon-jin continued to smile. "When those women in the imperial harem saw that I was favored, they couldn't wait to swallow me up. Do you know why I didn't have another child in the past 3 years? Because in the first year, I was drugged by the Empress and sterilized. At that time, I was bleeding nonstop. It was only later that I found out that I actually miscarried a child who wasn't even a month old." Gong Yimo was stunned. Why didn't Kim Yoon tell her these things? It wasn't that Kim Yoon didn't want to tell her, but that Kim Yoon felt that Gong Yimo had helped them too much. Since his mother had chosen this path, could it be that he still needed Immerse to help her settle the imperial harem? So he didn't say anything. He thought that Yoon-jin would understand one day, but he didn't expect that she would walk this path to the end. Yoon-jin slowly turned around and smiled enchantingly. "Look, am I beautiful? Beautiful, naturally beautiful. Otherwise, she wouldn't have given birth to Kim Yoon." Her expression gradually turned sinister. "But why? You're a beauty. I'm also a beauty. But you're so happy. You can do whatever you want and go wherever you want. You're already so happy. Why do you still want to snatch Yoon from me? She glared at Gong Yimo with red eyes. 2 years ago, when I had a miscarriage, Yoon only stayed with me for 1 day. But what about you? You only ate something bad, so Yoon took 3 days off to take care of you at home. I'm his mother. She didn't even think about it. Was it suitable for Kim Yoon, a man, to stay with her all day long? This summer, I said I want to eat lychees within 3 days. However, Yoon refused. She said that it would be a waste of money and manpower. She wanted me to wait for a while longer. You said you wanted luli, and Yoon immediately ordered people to look for it. She even bought it at a high price. I'm afraid it only took her less than 3 days, right? Gong Yimo was speechless. Even if she said that she needed lioli, she was afraid that it would be taken as an excuse. There were too many things like this, and each of them made Yunjin very sad. Perhaps this was the woman's conspiracy. She tricked her into giving herself to the emperor and suffering every day so that she could monopolize all her son's thoughts. No, she wouldn't allow it. As long as this person was dead, Yoon would become the same as before. As long as she was dead, everything would be fine. Moreover, Yoon wouldn't suspect that she did it on purpose. If she wanted to blame someone, she could only blame her bad luck for accidentally falling into the lake and dying. Therefore, Yoon-jin immediately put away her sorrow and smiled coldly. Why are you in a daze? Throw her down. Seeing the shadow guards closing in on Gong Yimo, her twisted heart felt much better. That's right. Why was she the only one suffering? Others should also have a taste of this feeling. Gong Yimo was defeated by Yoon-jin's strong logic. Initially, she felt that a weak person couldn't suddenly become brave. Sure enough, she was a pervert. This Yuheng Imperial Palace was really a training ground. Indeed, she sympathized with Yoon-jin's suffering. However, just like how she hated her for no reason, this pain shouldn't be blamed on her. Therefore, she wasn't afraid to make a move. Anyway, her interests were firmly tied to Kim Yoon's. As long as she didn't hurt Yoon-jin, Kim Yoon wouldn't do anything to her. However, what she didn't know was that if it wasn't for her interests, Kim Yoon wouldn't do anything to her. When she saw that Gong Yimo's martial arts were very good, Yoon-jin's face twisted again. Since she was so powerful, why didn't she directly bring her and Yoon out of the palace to live among the commoners? If Gong Yimo knew, she would definitely kneel down to her. How could she be at the same level as now? Moreover, even now, she couldn't bring 2 people and fight against 10,000 Imperial guards alone. Just as Gong Yimo gloomily knocked down everyone, Kim Yoon hurried over. Imperial Mother, what are you doing? Chapter 219. Kim Yoon's voice first made Yoon-jin subconsciously happy, but after hearing his words, her face darkened. Didn't Yoon say that he would only be back in 2 days? Then he came back early. Was it because of this bitch? Yoon-jin looked at Gong Yimo unkindly. Since she had already been discovered, she was too lazy to pretend anymore. She just didn't like this girl. She just didn't like her. Kim Yoon hurried over. Time seemed to have given him special treatment, making him look like he was 18 years old even though he was in his 20s. It was just that things had been going smoothly for the past 2 years, and his features had become more robust. Although he was still excessively beautiful, no one would treat Jin Yoon as a woman anymore. It was just that he was frowning now, and the enchanting mole at the corner of his eye had also dimmed. Mother, why are you doing this? Kim Yoon felt that it was simply unbelievable. Didn't Yimo do enough for him and his mother? Why did his mother have to do this to Yimo? He originally thought that his mother would be able to think it through, but he didn't expect that the more he thought about it, the worse it became. Yoon, I'm doing this for your own good. In front of Kim Yoon, Yoon-jin seemed to have become that weak little cold palace woman. She was already 40 years old, but when she spoke to him, she was full of grievances. Gong Yimo didn't notice it before, but now that she saw it, she couldn't help but tremble. It wasn't like what she thought, right? Kim Yoon angrily glared at Yoon-jin, but he couldn't really do anything to her. Kim Yoon was a filial person, and this kind of thing, He would only do what he did these 2 years, guarding and hiding it at the same time. What else could he do? However, Kim Yoon was extremely disappointed when he saw the shadow guards that had yet to disperse. Mother, I don't know what you're thinking, but please don't use the harem tactics on Yimo. She's still young, and there's nothing wrong with that. His words made Yoon Jin feel her face burning. She looked at Gong Yimo angrily. Gong Yimo looked up at the sky. No matter how they quarreled, Kim Yoon was here anyway. She could save some energy. Look at her. Look, Yoon, you weren't here just now, so you don't know how she made me angry. She's not as kind as you think. She's a vicious woman. Don't be fooled by her appearance. Kim Yoon was amused. He could not help but glance at Gong Yimo. At this moment, Gong Yimo winked at him as if she was watching a good show. That quick-witted and playful look made his heart skip a beat. In the depths of his heart, there was sweetness, but more of it was bitterness. He heard his own low voice. No matter what she does, it doesn't matter. Gong Yimo heard this and raised her chin proudly. She thought that since she was not really going to marry Kim Yoon would definitely let her do whatever she wanted. However, Yoon Jin would definitely overthink this. She felt relieved. However, she ignored the lingering longing in Kim Yoon's gentle voice when he said this. However, she ignored it, but it did not mean that Yoon Jin would ignore it. She only felt that her whole body was in an ice lake, and there was a bone-piercing chill everywhere. Her son fell in love with another woman. She was going to lose her only son. No, I won't allow it. Yoon Jin was furious. She rushed in front of Kim Yoon in a few steps, and her eyes were almost spitting fire. I will naturally choose your wife for you. But I won't allow it. So what if she has your child? Don't even think about marrying such a vixen with no self-respect. Not even a concubine. Gong Yimo was enraged when she heard this. Your son might not even marry her even if he wanted to. However, Kim Yoon was stunned. He stuttered and asked carefully, what child? So her son did not know? Yoon Jin said angrily, this vixen said she's pregnant with your child. Gong Yimo had wanted to explain, but since she did not know how to appreciate her kindness, she wanted to make her angry. As she thought about this, she took a few steps forward and held Kim Yoon's hand. She smiled and said, why? I want to marry him. This is your son's first child. If Kim Yoon succeeds the throne in the future, he will be the crown prince. How dare you? Yoon Jin's voice changed. Could it be that she was enduring so much just to pave the way for this bitch's child? The more irritable she was, the more pleased Gong Yimo was. Kim Yoon finally came back to his senses. He looked deeply at Gong Yimo, but did not withdraw his hand. Stop fooling around. He sounded sweet and helpless. Gong Yimo pouted unhappily. She started it. Only then did Jin Yun sigh and look at his imperial mother. Mother, Yimo lied to you. She's not pregnant. We are not what you think. Gong Yimo made a face at Kim Yoon. I didn't say that. She imagined it herself. However, Yoon Jin did not refute her. She only looked at Kim Yoon and asked seriously, then do you dare to say that you don't like her at all? Yoon Jin pointed her finger at Gong Yimo. Of course. He did not like her. He did not know why, but this was not the first time he said this, but it was harder to say it. Of course what? Yoon Jin's eyes were cold as she pressed on. The atmosphere in the lake pavilion was so strange. I don't like her. Kim Yoon took a deep breath and said slowly. However, after saying this, he felt as if all the strength in his limbs had been sucked out. His chest began to hurt, giving him the urge to roar and tell the world. What he said just now was a lie. Mother and son were connected. Yoon Jin was almost certain that Kim Yoon was lying. Her heart turned cold. But now, she could not expose him. After calming down, she became much smarter. Looking at Gong Yimo, she was afraid that she did not know about her son's feelings. If she exposed him and facilitated this matter, then she would regret it so much that her intestines would turn green. However, she looked at Gong Yimo seriously. This person could not be left alive. She occupied a very important position in Yoon's heart. She could feel it. Why? Wasn't the most important person to Yoon her his imperial mother? Kim Yoon only treated it as if the misunderstanding had been resolved and was about to leave with Gong Yimo. Gong Yimo was naturally eager and hurriedly followed. Only a dozen shadow guards and the beautiful imperial consort Yoon were left in the pavilion. When Gong Yimo turned around, she asked curiously, "Your imperial mother looks very weak. How did she do it when so many shadow guards listened to her?" After all, she spoke and acted so fearlessly just now. It proved that whether or not these shadow guards were sent by the emperor to protect her, they were now her people. When Kim Yoon heard her words, his face darkened. How could his imperial mother make these people so loyal? This reason, he did not want to say. Fortunately, Gong Yimo was just asking casually and walked ahead of him. Her black hair and snow-white fur clashed together. The exposed skin was as gentle as the clouds. Kim Yoon suddenly thought of what his imperial mother said just now. If we really have a child, that would be good. EMO did not have any feelings for him. Even if she was drunk, it was impossible. Thinking of this, his eyes dimmed. In the depths of his heart, there was a trace of unwillingness, but he quickly suppressed it. Chapter 220. When Yunjin came back, she was so angry that she smashed everything she could. It was hard to imagine that she would become such a person. After she was done, she called someone in. This person turned out to be one of the shadow guards from before. If Gong Yimo had seen his true face, she would have known that he was the assassin that Li Ku had intercepted her in the past. "Jinshi, did you see her clearly?" This seemingly random sentence actually had a deeper meaning behind it. It turned out that Yunjin had been wary of Gong Yimo for a long time. She had spent 2 whole years looking for her true identity, but just a few days ago, this person had sent someone to visit her and said that he might know who Gong Yimo was. However, Gong Yimo appeared and disappeared mysteriously, so he couldn't meet her. That was why he came to the pavilion today to ask him to identify her. So, Gong Yimo didn't enter the palace just to vent her anger. Kim Yoon and Gong Yimo sometimes underestimated Yunjin. Or rather, even if she did things badly, they didn't guard against her. That was why things turned out this way. When Jianqi heard this, he smiled sinisterly. Without a doubt, she is the Chaoyang princess who is being hunted down by Dayu State. Even though Yunjin was prepared, she couldn't help but be shocked when she heard this answer. She actually has such a powerful background. Her face revealed a mixture of joy and jealousy, and she didn't speak for a long time. It was fine when she was in the cold palace, but now that she had become an imperial concubine, her ears had opened up a little. Especially in the past few years when she was looking for Gong Yimo's identity, she had heard a lot of news about women. The one she heard the most was this Chaoyang princess. When she first heard about the Chaoyang princess, she was very impressed because she was simply a woman who had reached the pinnacle. However, that was also because the Chaoyang princess wasn't by her side and had nothing to do with her. Now, the Chaoyang princess had become Gong Yimo. She felt quite upset. She had to think about how to deal with this matter. Jinshi looked at Yunjin's thoughtful expression and suddenly loosened his grip on his collar. He wasn't bad-looking. His skin was fair, but there was a long scar on his chest. How did this scar come about? How did he get forced out of Dayu State? In the end, it was all related to Li Ku. Since Li Ku tried so hard to protect her and almost caused him to die, then the opportunity was right in front of him. He had to kill her. Yunjin was a little confused when she saw she taking off his clothes. "What are you doing? Didn't you say that as long as I became your highness's secret guard, I would be able to serve your highness's bed? Let me serve you." If Gong Yimo was here, she would definitely praise Yunjin for being a genius. In order to make the emperor's secret guards listen only to her, she actually slept with all of them to show her disgust towards the emperor. This way, even if someone wanted to accuse her of seducing the emperor, they would have to be alive to do so. After all, sleeping with her was equivalent to cuckolding the emperor. Therefore, they could only listen to her. Seeing Jinchi taking the initiative, Yunjin was also tired of the Emperor's weak body. She really didn't resist and let him do whatever he wanted. This was not like Empress Dowager Yuqi. Ever since she heard about Empress Dowager Yuqi's deeds, she was clearly heading in that direction. No wonder when Gong Yimo asked Kim Yun previously, Kim Yun refused to say. So, there was a reason behind it. At this moment, Gong Yimo didn't think about these things at all, because there were more important things to do. After leaving the Yuheng Palace, they went home. Gong Yimo was a little excited because this time, Kim Yun must have brought back good news. Quick, let me see. Gong Yimo couldn't wait in the carriage. Kim Yun sighed but still took out a few bricks for her to see. He didn't understand why Yimo would spend so much money to make refractory bricks. Because the current temperature didn't meet Yimo's requirements, the cost of making these bricks was even more expensive than gold. Gong Yimo even built a tunnel kiln for these bricks. The project was huge and spent a lot of manpower and money. Gong Yimo hugged the bricks happily. Now you complain that these things are expensive. In the future, I'll let them burn gold for you to see. Kim Yun patted her head. If you want to burn gold, you should be mining gold, but you're mining coal. How is this burning gold? Gong Yimo smiled mysteriously. These things would be of great use in the future, but right now, the mining progress in various places was very slow because it was very dangerous, so the demand for minerals had to be slow. However, the appearance of refractory bricks still made her very happy. Now, the highest temperature in Dayu State's smelting technology was 1300. With the refractory bricks, the temperature could be as high as 1500. Then, whether it was steel or other metal materials, it would be a piece of cake. Unfortunately, plans couldn't keep up with changes. She also didn't expect that a weak girl would become like this when she was angry. After the two returned to the mansion, they both breathed a sigh of relief. Gong Yimo couldn't stand Yunjin's prying eyes. Kim Yun felt that only when he returned home and saw her, his heart would feel better. Yimo, I'm sorry that I couldn't make it back for your birthday. This is your birthday present. Kim Yun suddenly said in Gong Yimo's courtyard. A present? Gong Yimo's eyes sparkled when she heard this. She took the brocade box from Kim Yun with anticipation. She was stunned. She took out a dazzling necklace. Her beautiful eyes were wide open. She looked very shocked. You actually managed to burn it out, colored glass. The ancient method of making colored glass had always been very laborious. There were more than 10 processes, so it was only used by the royal family. However, Gong Yimo knew that using her method of burning colored glass would greatly reduce the cost of producing colored glass when it reached a certain scale in the future. It was also a way to make money. However, she wasn't short of money now, so she put it aside and let Kim Yun focus on the matter of refractory bricks. Without a foundation, it was already very difficult for him to figure out these things. She didn't expect him to have the time and effort to get colored glass out. He even specially made a present for her. She was really touched. Kim Yun had always been a thoughtful and considerate man. Let me put it on for you? When he said this, Kim Yun became nervous for no reason. He was afraid that Gong Yimo would reject him. However, this colored glass necklace wasn't easy to obtain. He worked almost day and night. Under the supervision of both sides, he only slept for 4 hours a day before he was able to improve the ancient method and burn colored glass without delaying the progress of the refractory bricks. He didn't know. Would she like it? Gong Yimo was surprised by this second surprise. Without another word, she turned around and let Kim Yun put it on for her. She even lifted up her black hair, revealing her delicate and white neck. Kim Yun looked at the smooth, jade-like skin. It was almost faintly glowing. His Adam's apple moved. He suppressed the thoughts in his heart and put the necklace on. You're tuning in to the Romance Rendezvous YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support, and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.